All right, what up, everybody? It's your boy, the Infinite Dragon here, and welcome back to Witch on the Holy Night. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're watching an archive stream, be sure to check me out live. Link is always in the description down below, as well as a link to my Discord, which will let you know what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, all of that good stuff. Where we last left off, we found out that the sister was the main op, and she's here to run Aoko for her whole shit. Everything you want, I got it. She said, everything the light touches is mine. She really just said, like, it's yours, but it's mine now, actually. We continuing off with howling. Suddenly the Lion King plot, everything the light touches, mine. You don't own nothing. All right. Let's get active. What chapter are we at? I think that was 10. So we got like 3 more left, including this one. Yeah, 10. This everyday tale started like any other. The morning sun alerted Sojiro that a day of work lay ahead. Specifically, the gardens needed tending to. And an unkept garden made for an unhappy Sojiro. Luckily, today was his day off from all of his part-time jobs. It was the perfect opportunity to get his hands dirty. If you do a chapter a stream, we only got 3 streams left. Yeah, we'll finish this probably Monday. There was one problem, however. The mansion's grounds were vast. Not only had the courtyard been left to run wild, but the area around the front door had been neglected too. To tend to these problems thoroughly, he would have to work on them week in, week out. In an ideal world, his task would only take a day before its enormity. But for the moment, Sojiro decided to set foot into the mansion's wilderness and evict the weeds. They weren't paying taxes. Wasting none of the early light, he started tackling the ones around the mansion. By his estimation, he could clear the courtyard, and backyard, then take a small rest. It was just before noon in the sunroom. Alice had come down, book in hand, to find Aoko sitting down with a fashion magazine and elegantly sipping tea. Through the window, she could see the crouched figure of Sojiro shuffling by.
朝からやってるみたいよ。起きてカーテン開けたら、もうあの格好でスパスパやってたから。ついでに焼却炉の掃除も言いつけといたけど、いいでしょ?
They're so mean.
いいけど、頑張るのね彼。外はあんなにも寒いのに。
Alice quietly sat down. Her teacup had been placed on the table for her. She poured herself some tea and proceeded to open her book. Like, I don't necessarily expect them to help, but like, the fact that she was like, hey, clean the incinerator too. Like, he was doing that without your asking to. Y'all already making him pay rent. All right, Batra. The two sat passing time in silence. Having happened to have the same idea, a nice relaxing cup of tea in the sunroom. With their evening roles decided, there was no need for idle chatter. Naoko stared at the window, intermittently turning her gaze to her magazine. Alice was immersed in a book on rune magecraft, occasionally tilting her head as if to recall something. As if by unspoken agreement, in unison they pressed their teacups to their lips and glanced outside. To the two girls, Sojiro appeared as if he were an animal in a zoo. Neither was interested in lending a hand. Despite his sluggish movement, he was making good progress. As Aoko's attention turned back to the sunroom, her eyes met Alice's. Alice returned her gaze to the book. Though moments later, she raised her head again. Damn, nigga! What's going on? The same thing before, except really fast. Clearing her throat, she attempted to focus on reading. It was no surprise that Alice admired Sojiro's diligence. Not even 30 minutes had passed before he cleared the courtyard of unsightly weeds. Without stopping once, the mysterious gardener left the courtyard puffing clouds of white breath. The area he left behind was spotless. Alice muttered after scanning over his work. A stalwart Sojiro worked confidently and ceaselessly. She was impressed, like she was watching a scene from a great movie, but before long she grew irked. Why would he waste his energy like that, she thought. Actually, did you know that, at least in America, it is incredibly illegal to leave your yard unkempt like that? So they would have gotten fined several times over by now. Alice looked at the clock.
焼却炉。今から手入れをしたら夕方ね。そっちはもう終わってるわ。朝、上から見てたもの。壊されちゃいけないからあれこれ指示出してね。いやー、窓開けて散々となったから、部屋が冷えること冷えること。
It was safe to assume Aoko had come to the sunroom to escape her cold room. Between barking orders from a window and cleaning in the cold, it was clear who had the harder job.
しずきくん、何か言ってこなかった？言ってたけど、よく聞こえなかったわ。
In other words, his complaints fell on deaf ears. With nothing else to discuss, the two resumed their reading. The ever so tense silence was broken by Sojiro entering the house after finishing his cleaning. He stared at the two of them, displeased.
あったかそうだね、青崎。
外よりは幾分ね。廊下の気温は外とあまり変わらないけど。それで、どうして庭の掃除なんて始めたのよ、Sojiro。
Sojiro's subtle jibe had failed to find its target. He had no chance of winning, and so just hung his shoulders in defeat.
今日は本当に寒い。明日あたり雪でも降ってくるだろうから、外の掃除は早くに済ませたかったのに。焼却炉は予定外だったぞ。
He sounded resentful, but his problem was not with the additional work. If anything, he was glad to do it. What he did not care for was how nobody had even bothered to lend a hand.
いいじゃない。焼却炉はみんな使うんだから。じゃ、その首相な心がけついでに、2階の廊下に掃除機かけといてね。
Bitch.
それと、裏庭のブナの添え木、壊れかけてたでしょ。工具箱はあんたの部屋に置きっぱなしだから、それを使うこと。で、全部終わったら私の部屋に来てくれる？いらないものまとめておくから、焼却炉で焼いておいて。
This would make me fight someone. Hence why she made him clean the incinerator. Cruel, but clever.
それで青崎、君は何をするんだ？
そうね。やることもないし、ギターにでも触ってようかしら。
Aoko had thought hard about how to spend her afternoon. Yet the thought of cleaning did not cross her mind, as had always been the case. No, it was not out of spite that she did not think to help to clean. It was because the word cleaning was not in her vocabulary. Sojiro knew exactly why the mansion was in the state that it was in. Still, that did not change the fact that the corridor upstairs was very long, and Naoko was not lying about how cold it was inside. What? And Naoko was not lying about how cold it was inside. It was not some. That's a very weirdly worded sentence. How cold it was inside was not much different than outside.
そうか。あくまで掃除をする気はないんだな、尾崎。
He said the word akuma, which I think means aku means evil. So I feel like he said something a bit more pointed, but sure.
まあ、掃除はしたいからするけど、こう。一緒に住んでる人間をそこまでこき使って両親は痛まないか？それとも割と気づいてはいたけど両親そのものがないのか？
As usual, he might have gone too far. His remarks had hit too close to home. Oko closed her magazine and turned to face him. Infuriated, she glared, her sharp blue piercing her blue eyes. Jesus. Infuriated, she glared, her sharp blue eyes piercing into him. Sojiro knew he had not said anything unjust, but he always backed down first.
Sojiro, 何度も言うようだけど。
はい。
He replied automatically, straightening his back in response to Oko's cold, calm tone.
勘違いはしないで。私たちはあんたを同居させてあげてるんじゃない。これ以上ないって譲歩の末、仕方なく飼ってあげてるだけなんだからね。
This is where I would counter with, yeah, but that doesn't mean that you have to be the way that you are. Uncle did not mince her words. Sojiro nodded in defeat.
そうか。飼ってもらってるのか。
そう。番犬にもならないだろうけど。
You know what? Just kill me. Just fucking kill me. Just kill me. I'm like, come on now. Actually just kill me. Fuck it. Aoka responded, already tired of the conversation. You would think they'd have some sort of cleaning magic. You would think that, yes. While Sojiro had little room to counter, he still tried.
しかし一方、番犬は間違っても自分の食い縁を入れたり、天津さえ家賃を払ったりしないのも事実であった。
Nice, nice.
なんか言った？
Say it louder.
負け犬の遠吠えを少しばかり。
You know, actually, that's a pretty good comeback. It's a pretty good passive-aggressive comeback. He raised his hand dismissively, knowing he could not win. To Oko's ears, his attempt at self-deprecation sounded facetious.
宗十郎、あんた、本当にわかってる？
そうだな。君たちがどうあっても掃除をする気がないぐらいは、なんとか。
Oko grinned at her pet's obedience. As long as he knew his place, that's all that mattered to her. Bro, just kill me. She seemed to be extremely satisfied with his response.
余裕あるんだ、しずきくんってば。
Her playful smile darkened, as did Sojiro's expression.
青崎。
Hello, motherfucker.
Hello, Franklin.
このまま放っておくと、そんなことも言ってられなくなるんだけど、試してみる？
He shook his head, his expression growing more and more grim.
懸命ね。私も窒息したいなんて見たくないもの。
The grating sound subsided. Sojiro gingerly touched his throat. The collar that had suddenly tightened around his neck returned to its normal size.
気管が塞がれた時の苦しさを知らないんだろう、青崎は。本当に抵抗できなくなるんだぞ、あれは。
だからそのための首輪だって言ったでしょ？
Yeah, no, we would have to fight. Like, I just gotta whoop your ass. Or I gotta try. Like, I have to try to whoop your ass now. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm not gonna win or not.
今まで実践したことなかったし、あんたは相変わらず危機感ないし、心で一度しつけておいたの。
Fuck off.
それより掃除、急がないと日が暮れるんじゃないの？
Nobody asked him to do that. He just did it on his own because that's the kind of person he is. And now you're taking advantage of that kindness. That's I don't like that. I hate that actually.
結局今日はこうなる星の運びだったんだ。
Dojiro left the sunroom, his shoulders slumped and his tail between his legs. Naoko watched him leave before returning to her magazine as if nothing had happened. Alice paid no attention. None of that had anything to do with her. With Sojiro gone, the room once again fell silent. As the clock ticked on, Alice suddenly stopped flipping through her book.
ねえ、どうして彼を酷使するの？
She asked as though talking to herself. Naoko replied without so much as looking up.
別に最後には記憶を消させてもらうんだから、楽しかったら困るじゃない。
Obscure as ever, but sincere in her own way.
そう。言われてみればそうだったわね。
Alice could not believe she had forgotten about the situation. Silently, she looked up from her book and gazed outside once again. The courtyard through the window reminded her of where she lived a decade ago. Nothing could compare to the beauty of those gardens. But if that was the case, why did the scenery make her feel nostalgic? All Sojiro had done was taken care of the gardens with the goodness of his own heart. In only half a day, he had achieved so much. It was Christmas Eve and snow had started to fall. I think Dizzy's here. There they are. Do you need help? Do you need help? Its timing was too good, as though it had waited for that day specifically. The cold, bustling main street seemed bright and vibrant under the layer of frosty white. Reindeer statues illuminated the surroundings. Children danced merrily to jingle bells. People walked along the brick road smiling broadly. These festivities, however, had not reached the mansion on the hill. It would have been nice to see this mansion lit up with Christmas lights. Silence enveloped the isolating building. And the shadow of the snow-covered woodland grew longer, beckoning in the darkness. People returned to the warmth of their homes, knowing a bitter night lay ahead. Something had been amiss in the mansion all day. Perhaps it was the calm before the storm. 2 days had passed since Toko Ozaki had revealed herself. Aoko and Alice spent more and more time locked in their rooms. Mealtimes had grown noticeably quieter. With their roles decided, they were too busy with their own jobs to worry about each other. On this day, the two had been relaxing in the drawing room since morning. The mood was calm. Well, mostly at least. Sojiro was fretting that tonight would be the same.
雪が明日ならよかったのに。
He aimed his words towards the girls on the sofa, despite knowing they would be ignored. Whether the snow fell today, tomorrow, or not at all, it did not affect them. The snow just meant a white Christmas. Aoko remained silent. She wasn't ignoring she wasn't ignoring him per se. She just had other things on her mind. Sojiro knew this, but still cast a lonely glance around the sunroom. The courtyard he had cleaned only a few days ago was hidden by a layer of white. The falling snow would stop every so often, but then resume again as if teasing Sojiro. By the next morning, the courtyard would be a winter wonderland. Aoko and Alice sipped tea in an effort to fight the cold. In fact, that was all they were doing.
そういえば、トウコさんの髪の色は青崎より濃かったね。あんな綺麗な赤毛は初めて見た。短くしてるのはもったいなかったな。
Sojiro rambled on, not expecting a response. However,
短かったって姉貴の髪が？
Naoko's expression went from nonchalant to its usual sharpness.
それどういうこと？短くしてるって髪の毛のことよね。
ああ、アリスより短かったけど、それがどうしたんだ？
What was wrong with your Steam Deck, Whis?
別に、あの人前は私より長かったってだけ。そう、あの髪を切ったのね、姉貴は。
Naoko spoke in a grave tone. Showing slight interest, Alice turned to Sojiro.
普通じゃないな。髪を切ったぐらいでどうしたんだ一体。瞳子さんの髪が短いと青崎が困るのか？
まあその通りだけど。いいわ、どうせ夜まで暇だし説明ぐらいはしてあげる。あんたがそんなこと言わなければ未知数のまま瞳子と戦う羽目になっただろうし。
Naoko knowingly glanced at Alice, her expression suggesting she was treating her. She was also likely seeking approval. Alice remained stoic as ever, her expression showing neither approval nor disapproval.
簡単に言うと、魔術師にとっては髪の毛も武器ってことよ。昔から人間の髪や目は魔術の材料になりやすいの。女の場合はことさらにね。瞳の色は多いほどいいし、髪も長いほど質がいい。髪の毛は自身と同一視しやすいし、長い年月をかけて育てられる原始的で強力な原料と思ってくれていいわ。私が髪を伸ばしてるのはまあそういうこと。手入れが大変なんだけど、そこは女だから半分趣味みたいなもんよね。
Whis, how long is your hair? Sojiro glanced furtively at Alice, wondering if the same held true for her. Maybe Alice had cut it because it was a hassle to maintain. It sounded stupid, but then again, this was Alice. Sojiro nodded to himself.
ん？じゃあ青崎としてはいいことじゃないか。瞳子さんの髪短いんだから。
それがここに来る前に使い切ったものならいいんだけど、伸ばした髪にはいろいろと使い道があるのよ。私は瞬間的な術の強化にしか使えないけど、姉貴だったら高級的な術の補佐に使うはず。年月と想念を蓄えた髪は魔術師の分身とも言える。そういったものをね、死んじゃった犬だの猫だのを反言させるときに与えると、術者に服従する使い魔が出来上がるの。生前魔力のなかった使い魔。例えば猫とか犬ね。これらは術者の髪を取り込んで独自の魔術回路を得る。申請することで全く違う生き物、猫の魔術師になるってこと。例えば人語を介したり人間に化けてみたりって、行動原理も変わってしまって大抵は術者に似通った性格になるわ。そうよね、アリス。
Her last words came with a mocking smile. Alice silently ignored it.
じゃあ瞳子さんにはアリスのみたいな使い魔がいると？
そう見るのが妥当でしょうね。姉貴は20年以上伸ばし続けた髪と引き換えに強力な使い魔を用意したってことよ。
The fight of the amusement park. Just the thought of Alice Koanji releasing flat snark sent a shiver down Sojiro's spine. The oil of the moon had been a unique familiar out of this world.
ほら、そこ心配しない。三崎町をぶっ壊す規模の使い魔なんてありっこないから。確かに長く歴史のある紙を使用するほど強力な使い魔が出来上がる。 けど紙を使った魔術師はそれまで溜め込んできた山中のうちの一つを初めからやり直さないといけない。切った紙はまた伸ばさないといけないでしょ。使い魔を作るのは簡単だけど、そう多く従えないのはそういうことなの。
As Oko spoke, her mood visibly improved as though she made a breakthrough.
犬とか猫か。
Tilting his head to the side. He could not imagine a world where dogs and cats were so powerful.
変ね。
瞳子さんは人魚師よ。使い魔を作って自分のレベルを下げるのはどうなのかしら。
協力者がいないだけでしょ。青崎のお家騒動に人の手を借りたくないから自分だけで全部やるつもりなのよ。あ、もしかして遊園地の人形って羽木の紙で作られたんじゃないだろうな。
確かに話に聞いた限りだと特注品ね。呪いによる永久期間、両手のギミック、フィンの一撃、執念深さ。瞳子さんでもゼロから作るのは難しいでしょうけど。
けど何よアリス。
あの人は人形に自己を投影するような人じゃないわ。完璧な偽物なら許すけど、偽物に過ぎない偽物は容赦なく壊してきた。青子から見て、その特注人形は瞳子さんと同じ力量を持っていた。
まさか遠く及ばないわよ、あんなの。
なら瞳子さんの髪とあの人形は別件よ。あの人が自分の魔力を分け与えたほどの使い魔があと一体はいると見るべきね。
専門家としての意見。つまりその使い魔は姉貴より強い。
そうでないと意味がないわ。人手が足りないというのもあるでしょうけど、だって私たちは2人、彼女は1人だもの。
同時制圧も想定済みってわけ。なるほどね。その場合どっちが強い方を引き当てても恨みっこなしよ、アリス。こと使いまであんたが遅れを取るとは思えないけど。
Alice had never been defeated by a familiar. She sighed out Oko's overconfidence.
青子、たとえ20年間の蓄えを付与したとしても、その器が小動物では限度があるわ。あの瞳子さんが切り札になる使い魔を用意したのなら、それは。
よしてよ。いくらなんでも姉貴はそこまで悪趣味じゃないわ。
Oko and Alice stared at each other. The conversation had returned to the drawing room, but the subject matter was not for the faint of heart.
そうね。けれど、人間を追い詰めるのに最も効果的な相手は、やっぱり人間なのよ。瞳子さんが死者を亡者にしていなくても、それと同格の相手がいるぐらいは覚悟しておいて。
Okay,
はい、
some interesting
はい、
stuff is
わかった
happening
わ
right
よ。
now.
確かに天才ってやつは空気読めないから、どんな生き物の死体を用意してきても驚かないわ。
Oko nodded reluctantly at Alice's directness. Needless to say, the Sojiro was completely lost.
よくわからないけど、
You don't need to follow.
なんで青崎たちは死んでるってことに固執するんだ？生きてるものじゃダメなのか？
それは使い魔じゃなくて協力者でしょ。使い魔は基本術者なくしては生きられないものにしないと。 それでいて優れた意志を持ち、術者の資格や盲点を補える知性もある。それが一流の使い魔の条件よ。正直な話、それだけ都合のいいやつは死から作り直すしかないってわけ。
Completely obedient and capable of compensating for their mage's weaknesses. Sojiro felt that a familiar was little different than himself.
さて、姉貴は昔からルーン使いだったから戦術は予測できる。問題の切り札もどうやら使い魔らしい。自動人形もさすがにこの前で使い切っただろうし。
Aoko spoke directly to Alice, looking for confirmation. Alice nodded in agreement. So, Chad, this is what this series is known for. We have all these thoughts that's going on. We're gonna get our ankles broken in a second.
好き放題やられた借り、ギッタンギッタンにしてあのバカ姉貴に返してやる。
Aoko clenched teeth and balled her fist. It all seemed like nothing more than sibling rivalry. In fact, that's probably all it was. Looking at Aoko, Sojiro let out a sigh of relief. With what happened with Toko and how they reacted to her visit, the atmosphere had been deathly tense. For now, though, Aoko seemed much calmer. He took comfort in the thought that perhaps the sisters would just bury the hatchet. You know damn well that's not about to happen. Even if Aoko and Toko were not sisters, he would not want to see what would happen if they fought. The hands of the clock turned gently. Approaching Judgment Night, a merciless silence would soon come to mock Sojiro's complacency. That sister's gonna do some bullshit? Oh yeah. So we basically just went down every possible logical route we could think of. Now we're gonna get hit with some shit that we could not possibly think of. As night appeared, two things vanished. The first was the whimsical snowfall. The second was the lights of the mansion on top of the hill. Aoko and Alice were nowhere to be seen inside. Only Sojiro remained. It was the night of Christmas Eve. Though Aoko and Alice had yet to find Toko, they knew everything would be concluded over the course of this day and the next. Christmas comes but once a year. It was a singular time for endings and new beginnings. In Japan, the modern holiday dated back only about 100 years and celebrated Christ's birth only in name with all its latter-day trappings. It was neither a pure homage nor corruption of the festival that inspired it. Regardless, there was a significant increase in the land's mana during festivals. Such charged distortions were a boon to a mage's craft, be it creative or destructive. Tokaozaki sought to destroy the local sigils, which gathered and properly cycled the magical energy of the land and its people. Sojiro was able to gather that much from Aoko and Alice's conversation. Toko had already claimed 3 sigils. Only 2 remained. Any further loss would signal Aoko and Alice's defeat. In order to protect the remaining ones, they had split up. Aoko lacked power, so she would need to borrow a ploy from Alice and head to Toko's sigil, which boasted the greatest local energy supply. Alice would go fully equipped to the sigil in Yashirogi. I don't know why I was going to say Yggdrasil. Free from the constraints of civilized society, magecraft is most powerful at midnight. The young witch and their apprentice mage wished each other luck before leaving the mansion. It was almost 10 at night. After the girls set out, the first 2 hours passed quickly. When Aoko was ready to head off, Sojiro walked with her to the foyer. Neither had spoken a word to each other. She had departed without showing any sign of fear. It was difficult to tell whether she did not want to get him involved or whether she did not want to see him a worthy what? Or whether she did not want to see him a worthy ally in combat. Where's the magical nuclear bomb? It'll get here. To be fair, Alice does have a magical nuclear bomb. She threw one at fucking Sojiro. The thought stuck with him. He let out a long sigh, not out of dejection or frustration. It was a mechanical, emotionless breath. He sat on the near-frozen floor, staring vacantly at the skylight. Moonlight peeked through the clouds. He imagined the moonlight bouncing off the town's powdery blanket and illuminating the night. But he would not find himself downtown. Watching from the sidelines was his role to begin with. His roommates and he lived worlds apart. He could not keep up with them, and if he did not show the same kind of will, he would remain on the sidelines. However,
そうか。この手が必要な時は。
Sojiro looked up at the moon. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a trickle of sadness. Veiled in white and cloaked in darkness, the park seemed like a forgotten memory. Not a soul was in sight. Sojiro needs to be packing heat. I mean, if you're not expecting it, a gun would do it. The night felt far more enigmatic than usual, yet the air was clean enough to drink. That's a weird statement. Though only a sliver of moonlight peered through the clouds, it lit up the entire world. In those moments, the young girl's footsteps echoed, trampling the still white silence under the midnight sun. The pale moon illuminated the inky blue sky. Only a few streetlights and an incongruous phone booth betrayed signs of civilizations. A girl appeared, dressed in black, wrapped in black. Against the snowy landscape, the figure of Alice Kawanji was unmistakable. Pure black, deeper than even the night. Were her overcoat, gloves, and hat, even her hair and eyes. Nothing stirred for a time. Not Alice nor the white scenery. The world was still a painting of a snowy field. Only time moved, gradually darkening the lights in the park and eventually the nearby homes as well. Yashirogi was more modern and developed than the town of Misaki. Though the park was located in the center of the town, it had become a blind spot. It had been overlooked by developers and carried no commercial value. How did you overlook the center of the town? A few houses encircled the park. The streetlights turned off at midnight. It was white night. People, even machines, were fast asleep.
私が先なのね。
Alice whispered, watching the streetlights slowly fade. She thought she heard a dog howling in the distance. Perhaps it was howling at the moon. The howl reached deeper into the night than expected. A wolf, maybe? The phone rang. It was perhaps the first time it had rung since Sojiro moved into the mansion. Hesitantly, he picked up the receiver and brought it to his ear. He heard nothing. He felt he had to say something, but could not think what. Maybe something like, "Hello, Koenji residence." Or maybe, "You've reached the Aozaki residence." While he was deep in thought, a voice as light as air came through the receiver.
Shizuki.
Sojiro could barely hear the voice, but it was definitely Alice's.
そうだけど、アリス。
No response. The silence was as profound as the night, but for the sound of static from the receiver. After a long pause, Alice finally spoke.
青子はいる。
いや、まだ帰ってないけど。
そう。
With a click, the call ended. Sojiro wondered if she had something to say, but could not respond in time. Imagine she got mad at him for answering the phone. I imagine she wouldn't, but what the fuck? Slowly they advanced, carving through the fresh snow. There were so many. Where had they all come from? Dozens of feral dogs snarled at Alice, their eyes trained on her. The snow clung to the beast's mangy fur. Their clenched fangs and bloodshot eyes hid a barely reined hunger that might burst forth like lightning at any moment. They yearned to taste her warm flesh and satiate their empty bellies. To them, the girl in black stood like a lighthouse in a stormy sea. She watched them, disinterested. It appeared that the Yashirogi sigil was the key target tonight, and at Tokawa were Oko a gun. Alice had always been unflappable, and the child's play before her was hardly about to change that. Her main enemy was not the dogs surrounding her, but the lone mage behind them, Toko Ozaki.
ひどい趣味。ここ数年で品が落ちたの。まあ、それならそれで嬉しいけど。これが地金なら、青崎との付き合いもいよいよ白紙に戻せるわ。
Toko laughed at that. Acerbic? Never heard this word. Toko laughed at the acerbic taunt.
いやいや、これは不可抗力でね。安心しろアリス。間違っても私の趣味じゃない。
Crunching through the fallen snow, Toko slowly came into view. She wore a moss green coat that contrasted sharply with Alice's garb. A silk scarf warmed her neck. She stood tall, her hair short, striking a more valiant posture than any young man. After all, the two standing here needed to be less like the shining moon, and more like the darkness surrounding it. The barking abated. Like servants in a royal cart, they averted their eyes from their ruler, lest their eyes and hearts be plucked out. Oh, you're approaching me?
久しぶりだね、アリス。
And Alice just goes, I need to get closer to beat your ass.
トウコさんもお元気そうで。
They stood about 12 feet apart. No love had been lost between them. Just two enemies, one who was to be victorious and one who was to fall.
さて、どうしようかアリス。積もる話もある。君の近況にも興味がある。そもそも今回の件についていろいろと説明したくてたまらない。5分ほど時間を割いても構わないか？
お断りよ。あなたと5分も話をしていたら、その隙に内臓まで売却されそう。
The following events unfolded quickly. Boldly and without a second's thought, Alice pulled out a cat's bell that seemed from the seam of her mantle and dropped it. Diddle diddle. The beginning of Alice Kwanji's magecraft. The start of the night of fairy tales. Malco favored a quick draw approach, like something from a western. However, Alice preferred sleight of hand. She used her target's blind spots against them, ending the game before they knew it had begun. The bell fell, like a coin into a fountain. Then, as it was about to strike the ground, it shattered, disappearing without a trace.
ルーン。
ああ、一日かけて公園中に刻ませてもらった。
She just has Bohemian Rhapsody as a stand. That's actually true.
この公園の道はレンガだからね。手間こそかかったが簡単な仕事だった。周りの森まで見て、ざっと400平米のキャンバスだ。面白いだろ？今私たちは30万字以上のルーンの上にいる。
Rolling hard, Alice took a step back. Soka had carved runes all over the ground. Even in the area Diddle reacted to alone, there was a depressing amount of them. Had she truly carved them into the whole park? Alice did not react with surprise. She simply narrowed her eyes. She could see how it would have taken the whole day. It was no wonder Diddle Diddle, Banquet of the Night, was destroyed by Skin of Sun. Still, something bothered
一
Alice.
体どうやって隠していたの？
Kind of name is Bohemian Ecstatic. I don't know, man. Is that the censored name for it? There were just so many. What kind of magecraft could do that?
ああ、ちょっと特別性。このルーンね、普段は確定していないんだ。こうしている今も変形している。パッと見はただの傷跡。それが強い魔力に触れると元の形に立ち戻る。
That's kind of
形状
fucked
記憶
up.
ルーンとでも言おうかな。
So basically, the runes that she carved into the ground or into the trees or whatever, they all fucking move. And the moment that anything happens, they like solidify into a proper rune.
そんなわけで、いかなる夜の深さをもってしても、この太陽は没しない。この通り、雪が降ってくれたおかげで、視覚的なごまかしも万全だったしね。
She spoke modestly, but Alice could not imagine the amount of persistence, technique, and skill it must have taken. And it only took a day. Even 10 mages would have trouble producing so many sophisticated runes in that time. Moreover, these runes were made using unknown techniques the association had not approved.
負け惜しみだけど、私みたいな小娘一人に大人げないわね、瞳子さん。
バカを言うな。君を小娘だなんて一度も思ったことはないよ。まあ、私好みの体だと眠めつけることはあったがね。
What does that mean? It happened in the blink of an eye. Alice cut off Toko's snide remark with a deadly stare. The left eye of the darkly clad girl changed in color to an ominous ruby. The speed of the incantation was phenomenal. Alice's mystic eyes of enthralling snared Toko. She had been the one to quite literally be taken captive by the girl's stare. Toko tried to raise her arm but could not even move a finger. It's the shotting gun. Alice's mystic eyes commanded absolute control with no room for resistance. Only a person's internal organs were allowed the freedom to move. Since their organs still functioned, it was more precise to say that her eyes forbid the target from acting. Alice had played her hand with exquisite timing. It wasn't the speed of her eyes that had given her an edge. The deftness at which she wove the spell to exploit the briefest vulnerability is what made Alice a different caliber from other mages like Aoko. This witch, who lived hidden in the modern era, was more seasoned in magical battles than Toko Ozaki.
だが残念。ディドルディドルが響かないのでは、魔眼のアクロスティック化はできないようだな。惜しいね。あの月目のプロエキシャーなら、これで私の方はお手上げだったろうが。
This would have been a perfect time to pull out a gun and just shoot her. Ironically, the formation holding Toko began to distort. In the blink of an eye, the mage had bested Alice's mystic eyes. Alice's black outfit fluttered in the wind. She turned so she was not facing Toko on the mage, and recovered through her own mystic eyes. I cast gun. You guys are making the jokes, but like that's literally what Aoko does. Aoko literally has a magic gun. In the root of Toko's mystic eyes was the spell of Mesmerize. Most effective when facing the prey, such eyes could mind-jack a target's awareness. It was difficult to resist head-on. However, its effect was greatly diminished if the target was not facing the eyes directly, even if it was within range. Moreover, the girl was the last witch of her lineage who commanded a great number of fairy tales. Against mystic eyes that projected their effects, simply turning one's body was enough to repel half of the magical energy. Unlike Alice's eyes, Toko's could also disable actions. Alice had escaped by the skin of her teeth. The damage she suffered was the weight of a twig to a forest. She had just let that energy pass through. In an instant, a startling chill ran through Alice's body. This was a problem. The touch of death ran up her spine. She glared at the mage before her as blue rubber balls flowed from beneath her overcoat. The stare-off grew more intense. Alice glared harder, resisting Toko's magic eyes with her own. Losing was not an option. In terms of raw magical energy, Alice Koanji's mystic eyes were more powerful and advanced than Toko's. Surely nobody could beat her. And yet, her unfiltered stock of magical energy, stifled by old-fashioned values, was no match for Toko's madness. Deeper within her eyes, somehow the eyes revealed a sealed power. Inside the crystalline lens of the mage's left iris was a bottomless pit of clean cube. A Klein cube? What does that even mean? Alice winced in pain. The bitings grew in number. So many mystic eyes, thousands perhaps, all fixated on Alice. Pressure. So much pressure. Endless. Alice knew it. She saw. Incredulously, she saw eyes growing within eyes. Eyes for days. Toko had placed opposing mirrors inside her eyes, resulting in infinite glare. It was the act of a madwoman, creating mystical eyes within mystical eyes. She could even control the resulting chaos caused by all the copies. Her insanity knew no bounds. No mage in their right mind would mass-produce so many mystic eyes in the last escape of humankind so indiscriminately.
やれやれ、これもお気に召さないか。私なりにマインスターの真似事をしてみたつもりなんだが。
So kaleidoscope eye. What's really interesting about it is that Sharingan means copy wheel eye in the sense of like kaleidoscope. Like that's literally what the Sharingan is. I think Mangekyo actually means kaleidoscope. Don't quote me though.
うまくできているだろう。君の悪路のように希少な神秘で現実をねじ曲げるのではなく、量産した神秘で現実をねじ伏せる。物自体はただの魔眼。だがその段数には果てがない。相手がどれほどの魔力抵抗を持っていようと、それ以上の魔力で拘束するだけのものだ。
She wielded power without limit to disable an opponent. Once one was caught in them, one was chained to the concept of infinity. This is some JJK type shit. Projection type eyes had a fatal flaw. Their firepower and formula were insignificant compared to the great artillery of incanted spells, but Toko had torn down that conventional wisdom with brute strength. If the gun was a pea shooter, she simply needed to bring more guns. A 9mm bullet could never destroy a fortress unless one threw a fortress mass of bullets at it. The principle was brutishly simple, but in the world of magecraft where concepts decided supremacy, Toko's iterative mystic eyes were the perfect weapon. Just use solar flare? The target would be bound until she closed her eyes. In theory at least, the effects were infinite. No amount of magical energy could ever overcome it, so it was utterly futile to resist using magical energy. Of course, one way to counter it would be to stay out of Toko's line of sight to begin with. The standard tactic against mystic eyes was to defeat the user before they were aware of you. There was, however, another way. It was simpler than one might think. Make that bitch blink.
何か言い残すことは?
Alice could no longer see her enemy. Toko's infinite eyes had bound her. All she could do was make out a sliver of moonlight, and a blue streak tracing its way toward her.
結構悔いのない人生で羨ましい。
She drew a rune in the air, unleashing a shockwave to tear flesh asunder. The gusts became blades of air that shredded Alice's overcoat and minced. Blue feathers flitted all around. Tuko felt something behind her and turned. 5 cat-shaped bells were thrown at her feet. And just as quickly, they shattered into pieces. Standing before her was a completely unarmed Alice
そよ風み
Kuoji.
たいなルーンね。瞳子さん、本当に鈍った？
うつせみか。術者の身代わりになるプロイの話は聞いてなかったな。
ええ。1年のうち365日は役立たずで、どうしてあんなのが古参なのか私も疑問だけど。
As if responding to Alice's words, a bird began chirping frantically. An anonymous sacrifice. Who killed Cock Robin echoed into the night, sung out of tune.
ああ、そんな歌もあったな。
I've never heard of that, and I'm Googling it right now. Let's educate ourselves, chat. Who killed Cock Robin's song? No quick save. Okay, quick save.
ああ、そんな歌もあったな。
I need the volume. Okay. This might not make it into the VOD. In fact, I'm gonna pause the recording right now so we can hear it. Okay, that was interesting. So we just played the song. If you wanted to know what that sounded like, you can Google it yourself.
だがあれは一度に1回しか殺されない。2度目はないし、あったとしても。
The bird squawked a very unbird-like death throw. From behind Alice, the blue robin fell from its tree, a victim of Toko's mystic eyes.
本当に使えない。
さて、ではやり直しだ。あとも使えている。これで終わりにしよう、アリス。どのみち、この公園では手がないだろ。
そうでもないわ。確かに今の私にあなたの魔眼は破れない。けれど Beauty up with wood and clay, wood and clay, wood and clay, Beauty up with wood and clay, my fair lady.
The song came from the depths of the earth, stirring a mighty quake to mark the birth of something gargantuan. Toko needed to throw Alice into an infinite hell before whatever that was could be completed. But she was far too late.
Wood and clay will wash away, falling down, falling down. Beauty up with bricks and mortar, my fair lady.
The ground burst to life. A finger, then another, and another, all rising like towers. What does it sound like? London Bridge is falling down? It is London Bridge is falling down. Earth, snow, and brick knitted together, manifesting a giant stone golem.
そんなバカな話があるか。なぜこいつが出てきやがる。
Toko was so angry and confused she could barely gather her thoughts. The bridge giant. The monster from Monsters fairy tales rose from the ground, ruining Toko's plan. The giant was extremely powerful, but it can only be sundered under one condition. It must be in proximity to a natural river. I think they mentioned that before, like earlier in a different chapter. That was the monster's one and only condition. but this park was nowhere near one. And on top of that, it was rising up directly between Toko and Alice mid-battle.
あら、あるでしょう。すぐそこに。川と呼ぶには小さな、すぐに消えてしまうものだけど。
Toko lowered her gaze. She was standing in a puddle of water. The sacred red mage was dumbfounded. That's why Alice had used Diddle Diddle before. While the bells could be replenished, they were valuable to Alice, and she spent 5, throwing them in an intentional line for the sun runes to destroy. From there,
雪解けの流水か。
Shokan, giant soldier of stone. The arms of Thames Troll rose from the stone paving. The monster's torso alone surpassed 80 feet. Its form was made entirely of stone. Previously, she had created one using the trees of a forest. However, Toko knew instantly the monster before her was at least twice as powerful.
止まれ。
She unleashed her stacked mystic eyes. They were meaningless at this stage. They had no effect on the giant. It does kind of look like Alexander. As said, mystic eyes can be countered in 2 ways. The first is to hide oneself from view of the mage. That was a standard response. The other way, however, was devilishly simple yet 100% effective. In fact, it's less of a way, more of a fact. Mystic eyes curse a target by focusing on them. However, what if the target was too large to focus on entirely? It also gets rid of her runes because the runes were made out of the stone. The answer was, one could barely stop a single arm. The giant, unfazed, raised its right arm and swung it down on the ground, destroying thousands of runes. The demolished stones were then absorbed into its arm, adding to its mass. As the mage had said before, no matter how deep the night, these little suns won't set. While the suns might not set, they could be crushed under the bulk of a giant's hand. Why is she aura farming? The victor of the battle was decided. Toko Aozaki closed her eyes and prepared to escape. The stray dogs began to whine, fearful of the hulking figure before them.
参ったな。私ではマインスターには勝てなかったか。まあ、そのあたりは今後の課題としよう。
呆れた。逃げられると思っているの？トウコさん。
I know I say this a lot, but imagine being a normal ass person just walking by and you see this shit. Yeah, that normal ass person, his name is Sojiro.
まさか、そこまで鈍ってはいないよ、アリス。第一、逃げるとしたら、それは私の方じゃないからね。
There was no hint of bravado in Toko's tone. Even in the face of the Titan she had no means of harming, her confidence was unshakable. The reason being...
ま、前座は終わりだ。来い、レオ。
This was no longer a battle of skill. A fight for survival had begun. Snap went Toko's fingers. In response, a beautiful, high-pitched melody floated up toward the moon. It echoed all around them. The spiral howl dredged up ancient primal memories. Its source emerged from the shadows and landed next to the mage. Alice's lip trembled faintly, not from fear, but with admiration when she recognized the creature before her. It was a majestic golden beast, beyond the domain of both magic and phantasmal, simply divine. I hate it when they like have like pauses, but like it's the dash pauses, because technically it's written correctly, but nobody in current modern English uses dashes that way. Holy shit, it's a Lowland Ninetales. Holy shit, it's normal Ninetales. This is probably Beowulf, since she said Beo. It was a life that should have passed from the world of the Age of Gods. A mystic derived from human wisdom, preserved by thousands of generations of hidden tradition. A recreation of miracle that once freely walked the earth, the natural enemy of magecraft, able to crush it with ease. Quiet resignation settled over Alice's face. The golden beast charged. This time, she didn't even have a chance to admit defeat. I thought Beowulf was just a buff dude. Or is this a Skullgirl for some reference, or are we talking about Devil May Cry? She could hear the beast's breathing in her ear. It seemed she had been unconscious for a short time. Alice opened her eyes and took a deep breath. Each cough sent pain shooting through her body. Blood arose from the pit of her stomach and she spat onto the cold ground. When her vision returned, she was able to make out the distant sky, falling snow, and the golden wolf. The wolf panted. It stared at Alice, saliva dripping from its mouth onto her cheek. Razor-sharp fangs lined its jaws. Its fur was glossier than that of any animal she'd ever seen. Brutal, knife-like claws protruded from its massive blood-stained paws. And yet it did not smell like a beast. Surely the presence of such a noble creature, a human would feel like the lesser animal. The battle between Alice and the wolf was over before it had begun. After destroying the troll, it baptized Alice with its wicked claws, giving her no chance to escape. Its side swipe had torn into her abdomen like a sword, carving through her clothes and flesh all the way to her heart. Even so, not once did Alice make a sound. Wolf had her pinned and stared at her face. If you kill this thing, you make some sick ass gloves and boots. Why would you not immediately go for the coat? Her limbs felt ready to break at any moment. That was the situation she found herself in. Now fully conscious, Alice stared at her enemy through pained eyes. She felt no fear. Only cold reality sinking in. This is not what Garo is like. I've been into Tokusatsu, the Garo from 2005. Anyway, sensing Alice's demeanor, the wolf suddenly paused, its paw still raised. They looked into each other's eyes. The wolf's voice came out as surprise, but there was no doubt it had spoken. The wolf's voice sounded innocent, almost childlike. In complete contrast to what had happened up to that point, the wolf smiled. Wolf opened its mouth wide and clamped its jaws around Alice's neck.
Beo!
Toko's tone was sharper than the wolf's fangs. The wolf froze. He let go and slowly turned his head towards the voice.
とどめは刺すなと言ったろ。余計な仕事を増やす気か、バカも。
それはそれで楽しいのに。ああ、退屈。話に聞いた橋の巨人も結局は他の生き物と一緒だったし。
The wolf backed away from Alice, as if no longer interested in his prey. To the golden beast, she was little more than a chew toy.
なんだ、もう意識が戻ったのか。心もタフなら体も大概だな。骨まで砕いてその程度の出血とは。マインスターの教育の賜物かい？
Barely clinging to life, Alice stared at Toko. But not the stare of hatred and defeat, but only of disbelief. Alice simply wondered why Toko had brought such a beast.
ああ、紹介が遅れたな。彼はおそらく地上で現存している最後の人狼だ。
Werewolf?
北欧の奥地に生きる彼らの一族の中に現れた生粋の原種だよ。見ての通り、先祖返りなんて言葉じゃ表せない黄金の神秘でね。名前がなかったんで、わかりやすくベオウルフと呼んでいる。
So it's a fucking werewolf named Beowulf. Got it.
ベオウルフ。
Alice's face was perplexed, even though she hadn't wavered when she was disemboweled. Beowulf, the name of the heroic giant slayer from Danish legend. It came from Old English, a combination of honeybee and wild beast, a bear in other words.
なんでそんなちぐはぐな名前を。
ん？いや、可愛いからに決まってるだろ。
Perhaps because of the name or because of the golden beast itself. Fighting the pain, Alice struggled to read Toko. In this respect, she was worse than Aoko.
ついでに説明しておくと、周りの犬どもはベオが勝手に呼び寄せたものだ。私自身、マインスターの娘がただの畜生に傷つけられるとは思ってはいないよ。今のところは。
Toko's mouth twisted into a grin. Not the warm one Sojiro saw, but the merciless smile of victor displays to a loser. The disdain in Alice's eyes turned to anger. The Golden Mystic. How could Toko have brought such a creature into the human world?
需要と供給だよ。過疎化は人間だけの問題じゃない。彼らもいい加減、昔ながらの生活には限界が来たらしくてね。と言っても、あくまで里から出すだけの権利だがね。お察しの通り、私の髪はベオとの契約に使い切った。自分の髪を使って分身を作るより。
While she was talking, Toko noticed something strange. An unusual sound. A preternatural sound that tore at the mind. A sound that should not have existed. And it was coming from the girl's open abdomen.
もう復元が始まったか。いや、というより。
ん？何この匂い。トウコさん、なんかワクワクすること起きてない？
Curious, Beowulf moved closer, like a puppy examining a new toy.
見るな、あっちに行っていろ、ベオ。正気を失っても知らんぞ。
Toko shooed the mud away with her hand. Beowulf lowered his head meekly and withdrew.
教育方針を間違ったかな。まったく、乙女の腹を見ようなんて恥を知れ、恥を。
Where the fuck else was he supposed to go? You see how big that fucking dog is? There was only, like, you either go for a limb, her fucking head, or her abdomen. There was no other place. He's too big to get anything else. What kind of shit is that?
トウコさんだって見てるじゃない。
バカ。私は乙女だからいいんだ。
Okay, we're working on 2000 logic. If Oko had been there, she would have blasted them away for their impudence, just as she did against Flat Snark.
まあ、しかしむごいな。こんなになるまで放っておくとは。マインスターは人の親とは言えまいよ。
With her gloved hand, Toko ran her fingers along the wound of Alice's abdomen. A flash of pain ran through Alice's body. Alice had held in her screams, but she finally let out a long breath. She turned her face away, in pain or shame.
ほら、もう肌も復元している。骨格、血管はおろか、内臓にまで施された、おびただしいまでの刻印だ。生後、肉体に魔術回路を付加することは、諸刃の剣だ。呪文と自分を一体化させることにより、栄唱の手間を省き、術者に多大な利点をもたらす魔術刻印。しかし、 それは多ければ多いほど苦痛を伴う。青崎の刻印は腕一本分。まあ君に比べれば少ない方だな。
The magic crest Toko referred to were the inheritance of the Alzaki family passed down by their ancestors. They could only be inherited. Toko had received the ones that were meant for Toko.
しかしそれも良し悪しだな。右腕に刻印をした青子の痛みは残る人間の体と神秘となった右腕とが反発する程度だ。通常の肉体が右腕を否定し抹消にかかる痛み、精神的にも肉体的にも生じる幻痛は現在にも似て拭い去ることはできない。だがここまで来ると痛みも何もあるまい。そもそも生きている実感はあるのか？自分が人間だとまだ信じている？ああ、本当に。お互い非凡な死を持つと苦労するね、アリス。
Toko took Alice's body in her arms. The wounds from Beowulf had mostly healed. Even so, her breathing was shallow, likely due to the pain. Toko gently held the girl's face in her hand.
マインスターには恩がある。それに私の相手はあくまで青子一人だ。
Alice's lungs pined for oxygen. Toko pressed her lips to hers. The young girl wriggled, trying to escape, but Toko held her firmly. Beneath the blue moon, the two remained frozen. Then the sound of swallowing. Something solid slid down Alice's throat. With that, she went limp and her arm fell. After settling Alice down on her side, Toko stood up.
今のは七かまどに手を加えた私の特製品だ。そう簡単に解毒はできない。魔力を流せば体の中で暴発する仕組みになっているから気をつけなさい。
Yes, she just drugged her.
ああ、口移しは私の趣味だから。特に気にすることはないよ。
Typo! Typo! As she desperately clung to consciousness, Alice looked up at Toko from the ground. The disgrace from the kiss was greater than the pain she felt in her body. Toko began walking away, her golden wolf in tow. Neither looked back to see Alice's hateful glare.
そうそう、一つ言い忘れていた。ベオが呼び寄せた野犬たちだけどね。公園の外にまだ山ほどいるんだが、困ったことに彼らは本来何を口にするべきかを思い出している。ベオの野生に刺激されたんだろう。獣はより強い獣に従うものだからな。
Your fun fact for today is that alpha males are not real. In a roundabout way, Toko had read Alice her last rites. In nature, it was common for the weak that could no longer move to offer their bodies up to feed the strong.
じゃあ、私は行くよ。歩くことも満足にできないだろうが、無事。
With a twisted grin, the mage headed into darkness. As her footsteps faded, the sound of growls grew louder. Alice could barely focus her eyes. The hounds looked like monsters out of a picture book. Alice took a deep breath, her consciousness slipping away. The sky was blue, the trees were tall, the park was a graveyard. In the corner of her eye, though, Alice could just about make out a solitary phone booth. The phone rang. It was the second time Sojiro had heard its voice echo through the cold foyer. Only a few minutes had passed since Alice called. He wondered what she could want this time. The call persisted, determined not to leave him to his thoughts.
はい、クオンジですが。
あら、その声は宗十郎くん？
A cheery voice? Sojiro had been expecting Alice. It was Toko Aozaki. Somehow Sojiro was not surprised.
そうですけど、瞳子さん、暇なんですか？
He checked the time. He thought it was about midnight by now. No matter what the situation, Jojo always kept his cool. He could hear Toko trying to suppress a laugh. After taking a while to compose herself, she started talking again.
ごめんなさい。ちょっとツボ入っちゃったみたい。で、質問の開始ね。これがあんまり暇じゃないな。私も今日で終わらせる予定だから忙しいんだ。
偶然ですね。青崎もそんなことを言ってました。
やっぱりそうね。こういう時は本当に姉妹だなって思うわ。昔からエンジンかけるタイミングだけは一緒だったから、あのことは。ところで、青崎はやめてって言ったでしょ。私も青崎だからくすぐったいのよね。そう言われるの。
Sojiro realized she was probably right. Aozaki's words made more sense now.
まあそんなわけだから長話をする気はないんだ。単刀直入に聞くけど。
It's almost unless she was worried about her sister's whereabouts. But the cool-headed Sojiro had not forgotten Toko was their enemy. Keeping Aoko and Alice in mind, he decided to be evasive.
さあ、なんて答えてほしいんですか？瞳子さんとしては。
The question shifted the tone of the conversation drastically. Sojiro could hear Toko muttering to herself in annoyance. Sojiro was proving more quick-witted than she had anticipated. A change of tack was required.
そうね。君には何も答えてほしくないっていうのが正解かな。第一印象で君を無視するのは良くない気がしてたけど、やっぱり私は宗十郎君を手にかけたくはないみたい。君はこのまま無関係でいてちょうだいね。
Her warning came from the heart. Hello, Rocket Pal. Sojiro had responded flatly, once again not giving any sign either way. It seemed she wanted him to stay out of this too. Even Sojiro could tell the girls were being kind in their own way. But who asked for their kindness?
じゃあ、さよならね。私は君が思ってるほど暇じゃないから。でも、最後に一つだけ。君を試すようで悪いんだけど、伝えておかないと一生恨まれそうだし。
No, please, I deleted his message.
なんで、そうならないように、責任の半分を君に押し付けちゃおうかな。
Toko giggled. A laugh to show she had him in the palm of her hand from the
さっ
beginning.
きクオンジさんに会ってきたの。彼女から電話があったでしょ。
Her tone had not changed. She sounded as cordial as before. Even so, as soon as Sojiro heard Alice's name, a chill ran up his spine.
彼女、今ひどい状態なんだ。満足に歩けないどころか、体中の刻印が活性化して破裂寸前。宗十郎君が骨折の痛みを知ってるなら、うまい例えようがあるんだけどね。まあ、ともかくだ。いつ気を失ってもおかしくない状態なんだけど、災難なことに怖い野犬に囲まれてるみたいなの。個人的な意見だけど。
She spoke as if she was telling a joke. If it was a joke, it was in bad taste. However, Sojiro knew this was anything but. She was telling the truth. He had not heard of dogs attacking anyone in town, but the noise he heard while the phone with Alice suddenly made sense. Dogs, a pack of them. No doubt about it, they were surrounding their prey. Why had he not cottoned on? That's definitely not what they meant to say. Squeezing the receiver in his hand, Sojiro cursed himself. Alice had been calling for help. Even when backed into a corner, she had not wanted to involve Sojiro. Still, she needed help. The way she said his name so
場
lightly,
所は
he spoke abruptly. Even though he knew Toko was the enemy, he was confident she would answer him. That was the reason she called.
教えてあげてもいいけど、そうした瞬間に、君は私の敵になるのよ。その覚悟はある？
Sojiro realized what was happening. He was being tested. By ignoring Alice, he would be confirming that he did not want to get involved. But if he decided to save her,
それで場所は
Sojiro ignored Togo's question. Of course, he was not prepared to become her enemy, but he was even less prepared to let Alice die. He had lost his ability to think sensibly, and was not that he was particularly good about that to begin with. Still, he would not waste any time in deliberation. He would simply go with his instincts. It was one of the few times he had felt pride since coming down from the mountains.
ちょっと残念だな。私は本当に君が気に入ってたのに。まあ、こうなることは分かってたけどね。場所はヤシロギの森林公園。受話器の下に地図があるでしょ。この前帰りがけにしおりを挟んでおいたから、それを参考にすること。
That bitch was planning so far in advance, she knew which one was gonna come to... Jesus Christ.
繰り返すようだけど、10分持てば幸運。その後は1分ごとに奇跡の価値が上がるような状況よ。今の彼女は。
As he listened, Sojiro's expression turned into one of irritation. Misaki and Yashirogi were one station apart. How long would it take to get there from the station to the mansion? Usually just under 12 minutes. By the time he got off to the train at Yashirogi, nearly 30 minutes would have
地
passed.
図の上じゃ近いのに、区画整理された交通手段は不便よね。けど、急げば最終の電車には間に合うわ。ここで諦めた方が賢明だけど、君はもう私の敵だから。どっちにしたって、後悔のないようにね。
The line went dead. Sojiro, not Soko, had hung up the phone. He memorized the map. Damn! He memorized the map and then made for the door. With no time to grab his coat, he ran out the snowy, wintry night with clothes he had on. All that remained in the hall was the discarded map. It showed Misaki City. It was about 10 miles from the mansion to the nature park. 5 if you went in a straight line, but the streets were not that forgiving. 4 inches from the map, but so much farther in reality. For the first time, Sojiro cursed the town. He's fucking sprinting like a moose in snow. Alice's injuries were not limited to her abdomen. The wolf had punched a hole straight through her back, Jesus, crushing her low vertebrae and leaving both her legs paralyzed. Though her magic crests were repairing the damage, it would likely take another hour before recovering. At the very least, her heart and slender arms... Okay, can we stop? You used a different word? Still worked. Although after crawling along the ground to the phone booth, those two were failing her. As the crest healed her wounds, a searing heat ran through her body that threatened to overwhelm her. It was as if her body was no longer her own, like she was transforming into another creature. The poison throbbing through her open wounds hurt emotionally more than physically. She was used to pain. She could not accept this disquieting feeling. Not that she had any intention to. The moment she did, it would be her last. Alice wrestled with the discomfort from her abdomen and her magic breasts. And with her consciousness holding on by a thread, she took the phone in her hand. It was unlikely Aoko would be there to pick up. Even so, with the stray dogs gathering around the booth, she had to try. It was Sojiro who picked up. Alice knew she was better off just hanging up, but his name slipped out of her mouth. After pausing and fighting with herself for some time, an image of an innocent boy came to mind, and she hung up. Her instincts had grown out. She could not let him get involved. And not just because he was an innocent bystander. It was more than that. To Alice, Sojiro appeared that day because he was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time. When the lightest of breaths passed her lips, above her, the moon began to blur. Snow was falling again, so close, yet so far. The dogs began hurling themselves at the phone booth to a chorus of hungry snarls. She took one last breath and closed her eyes. Glass, an unnatural material for comfort. But the girl knew, in some corner of her mind, that she had made the right choice not to ask the boy for help. Some time passed. A peculiar sight came into view. a field of wild flowers. The clear sky was too blue. The flowers so numerous they made the field look barren. The sight was so dazzlingly beautiful she wished she could look away. This is probably all thanks to the Father Winter. The cold wind carried a scent of paradise far removed, untainted by man or beast. It was a glimpse of the fields beyond winter. One could be forgiven for thinking they were the afterlife. Come to think of it, she remembered how funerals were sad yet always beautiful. She cried. She made encourageous whine a sound of life. Her breathing was strained and erratic. Hollowed and useless was the heart that she once used to fend off pain. It was as though she was in the space between disconnected body and mind. A crying woman and a silent child. High was the sky, deep was the forest, unmoving were the people. No footsteps or voices of salvation came. Who was that looking innocently up at the sky in the stillness? Whenever she came to, Alice was going up a familiar hill. The cold night air had been but frozen her hands and feet. She shook, as you would expect for someone whose abdomen had been torn apart. She could barely comprehend that she was being carried up slowly up Shiro Inuzuka. Sojiro had Alice on his back and was silently ascending the slope. His calm eyes seemed to be suffering from the bitter cold. He did not seem to be dressed for the time of year. Not even a coat. His exposed neck and hands were ice cold. Alice asked, still slumped over his frame. She tried to move, but to no avail. The last thing she wanted was to rest her entire weight on someone else.
瞳子さんから電話があった。アリスが危ないって。青崎はともかく、アリスは意地を張りすぎだ。あの状況で助けを呼ばないのはどうかしてる。そりゃ、自分が言っても何もできなかっただろうけど。
Sojiro spoke with a scolding tone, his eyes kept firmly ahead. He did sound like she was about to die, yeah. You know that one box art for Doom? Nope. With all the demons surrounding Doom guy, that was Sojiro and the dogs. I'm thinking of the one like official art of SMT3 Nocturne where fucking the demi-theme is palming the shit out of that one demon's head. His words were directed at himself rather than the girl on his back. I think it's actually Angel. It might be both. I think he's double fisting demons.
だろうね。けど、これで関係はできた。館に着いたら話してもらうぞ。
Sojiro focused on climbing the hill. The slope would get steeper from here to the mansion. The thought of Sojiro climbing this steep hill with her on her back surprised Alice.
降りるわ。もう大丈夫だから。
お腹をむき出しでかい？この方が少しは暖かいよ。それに、アリスは薪より軽い。山じゃこの程度は朝飯前だから気にしないでくれ。息が上がっているのは公園まで急いだからだし。まあ、その意味はなかったんだが。
なぜ？
俺が着いたら犬はさっさと散っていった。初めから瞳子さんはそういうつもりだったんだ。アリスをどうにかするつもりもなければ時間制限もなかった。喜ぶべきことなんだろうけど。
Sojiro said dejectedly, but he was wrong. Motoko did not want to kill Alice per se. She would have not cared if she died. At least that was the way Alice saw it. She did not know how long it took Sojiro to get to the park, but if he had not come, the phone booth would have collapsed and she would be dead. Alice did her best to suppress her thoughts and feelings. She felt silly at the thought of correcting him, and it would matter little anyway. The thought of her trying to thank him was more painful than her open wounds.
もしかして公園からずっと。
仕方ないだろう。電車終わってたんだから。タクシーを使えばよかったんだけど、あいにく持ち合わせがなくて。ほんと、今日ほどお金の不便さを思い知った日はない。
For the first time today, Sojiro let out a sigh. There was no point in taking a break. He'd already traveled close to 6 miles like this. Perhaps the fatigue was getting to him. Sojiro was more upset with his own weakness than the difficulty of the task.
でもそれを言うならお金の大切さじゃない。
使えるものがあるのにお金がないだけで使えないんだから、それって不便って言わないか？
The innocence of his question made Alice briefly forget her pain. She too felt distant from the real world, but compared to the boy carrying her, she felt like a regular citizen.
何かあなたらしいわ。
Alice smiled to herself. As Alice rested her head, something soft touched her cheek. The collar Oko had given him.
館に着いたら着替えるんだ。お腹の血も拭って、落ち着いたら今で話そう。瞳子さんに言わせれば、俺もこれで敵らしいから。
With those words hanging in the air, they reached the top of the hill. The gate in the woods stood before them. Beyond it, illuminated the pale moonlight, stood the mansion. Looking up at it, the girl felt a little disappointed. And not sure reaction, yet she could not place where her sadness was coming from. Once they entered the mansion, Alice slid off Sojiro's back and walked toward the west wing. The west wing was her domain. However, after only a few steps, she collapsed to the floor. Sojiro rushed over to her, but she raised a hand. Her gesture told him he was not to come closer. He stopped in his tracks, a concerned look on his face. Her pale skin gleamed with sweat, her expression uncharacteristically strained.
平気。部屋に戻るぐらいの力は戻ったわ。服を作ろってくるから、あなたはここにいて。すぐに戻ってくるから。そうしたら。
Shouldn't your ass sleep? The pained look in Alice's eyes told Sojiro they would talk later. He knew he could not stop her. Sojiro reminded himself that he was the one in pain. Sojiro reminded himself that she was the one in pain, not him.
それじゃあ、戻ってきたら話を聞かせてくれ。
Alice took a deep breath before slowly disappearing down the corridor. An uneventful 5 minutes passed. Alice returned wearing a fresh set of black clothes, but her complexion remained pale. Pallid? With a small sigh, she carefully leaned against the pillar in the foyer and slid down until she was sitting.
アリス、傷が痛むなら無理せず横になった方がいい。
The fuck is Oko? Oko is still probably at the other sigil. Sojiro sat across from her on the cold floor.
傷はもう痛まないわ。横になる必要もない。
You don't look so fucking good, dude.
この体の異常は七かまどを飲まされたせいだから。どうあっても治らないもの。
じゃあ、せめて毛布とか。
いいから、気遣いはしないで。ここなら寒さも関係ないから。
She seemed to be telling the truth. Sojiro remembered Oko telling him that as long as Alice is inside the mansion, she would be comfortable.
あったかいのならいい。それで、七かまどっていうのは
薬草の一種よ。7回かまどで焼いても燃え残ることから付けられた名前で、紅葉は魔除け。普通の人には良くない程度だけど、私や青子には少し厄介ね。体内での魔力生成そのものに抵抗されてしまうから手の打ちようがない。
毒と思っていいのか？
いえ、本来は薬草よ。 今は傷を治すために魔力を使っているから苦しいけど、傷が完治すればおとなしくなるわ。魔術さえ使わなければ七かまども反応しないから。単純な話、七かまどを消化するまで私は役には立たないだけ。
Alice paused. He decided not to say how many days it would take.
別にしずきくんが心配することじゃないわ。こんなの血が流れる程度の痛みだから。
She worked hard to keep her tone calm. Elka had barely blinked when she was struck in the back, so mages must have an unusually high pain threshold. Sojiro was surprised and bewildered by what she said. If wounds didn't count as long as the pain wasn't too bad, then nothing would hurt except an injury that killed you.
わかった。話をするのは明日にしよう。今日はとにかく体を休めてほしい。
明日になっても私の容体は変わらないけど。
いいんだ、それでも。アリスはもっと体を大事にしてくれ。
He stood up.
部屋まで送るよ。それとも今で休むか？西館には入ったことはないから、アリスの部屋もわからないし。
ここでいいわ。青子を待たなくちゃいけないから。
Alice looked up at the skylight. The moonlight illuminated her pained face. The foyer looked like it belonged to a run-down castle. Only the moon and Alice seemed more vivid than reality. Where did her strength come from? Sojiro stared at her. Without understanding the significance of Alice's gaze, he turned his gaze to the night sky, powerless as it was. For the third time that night, the silence was broken by the sound of a phone ringing. Before Sojiro could move, a thin shadow bolted across the foyer. By the time he realized it was the weakened Alice, she had already taken the receiver in her hand.
青子。
It was the first time Sojiro had heard Alice sound concerned. Her tone was infinitely graver than when she was enduring her own pain. Alice's question received only a short response from the voice on the other end. It was a voice more frail than Alice's, like a flickering flame about to turn to smoke.
ごめん、やられた。
The phone was far from Sojiro's ears, but the words he picked up were very unlike her. Despite saying so little, no, because she said so little, the weight of Oko's defeat struck Sojiro hard. Alice silently set down the receiver. Oh, shut up, Rocket Pal. Only moments before, her body had been fighting the pain, and now felt stronger than ever. It was like a scarecrow transforming into a beautiful stone statue. Seeing this, Sojiro finally understood. Alice's expression when she looked at the moon had come from her trying to accept an immutable reality. Alright, I'm gonna take a quick break and we'll continue. Okay, let's continue on. Oko had not hung up, but the line remained silent. Alice set down the receiver, quickly put on her mantle, and made for the entrance, moving her injured body by sheer willpower alone. Along the way, she paused, turned to Sojiro, and looked directly at him.
青子に何かあったんだな。
Alice hesitated for a moment, before pushing aside her anxiety and grabbing his hand.
しずきくん、一緒に来て。
待ってくれ。一緒にってどこに？
間境界まで。青子の方は 営利神父にお願いするしかないから。
間教会って病院の横にある。
そう。知っているのなら問題ないわね。
Oops. Alice left the mansion and made her way down the tree-lined path. Tree-lined. She was clearly determined, but the look in her eyes betrayed her pain.
アリス、連絡をするなら電話は。
Sojiro asked Alice, whose grip on his hand was light but unyielding.
教会の人にならもう知らせた。もしかして病院のことを言っているなら、それこそ無駄よ。ハイヤーなんて言うけど、空を飛ぶわけでもないし。今は助けを呼ぶより、助けに行かないと間に合わない。
Alice had thought of everything. She turned to the mansion and lightly snapped her fingers. In response, a window opened and countless starlings took flight.
1番隊は索敵。2番隊と3番隊は現場に向かって応急処置を。在庫切れになってもいいわ。まだ生きているなら、青子の心臓を止めないで。
Alice commanded the birds firmly.
しずきくんは裏庭から青子の自転車を持ってきて。
Sojiro let slip his discomfort at the thought of that thing. The custom-made red bicycle. When he was cleaning the incinerator, Roko had verbally assaulted him for nearly scratching it.
いいけど、どうするつもりなんだ、アリスは。
ここにいるより、教会にいた方がしずきくんは安全よ。それに、私も急がないといけない。しずきくん、二人乗りできる？
While Sojiro had seen people riding tandem and was confident he could imitate them, he still wasn't quite certain he could trust a bicycle with his life. Moreover, its frame was so light he was unsure it could support both their weights.
二人乗りってことは、アリスが後ろに乗るのか？
Surprised they didn't call the bike slender.
できないなら、いいわ。
Alice turned away as if to snub him, then began walking. Unfortunately for Sojiro, he was now on her bad side.
いや、そういう意味じゃないんだ。アリスとはイメージが合わなかったから。
Ignoring his pleas, she continued briskly toward the woods. There was no way she was going to ride the bike now. Sensing her stubborn streak, he desperately called out to her.
待った、今のはこっちが悪かった。すぐに持ってくるから、怒るのはつけにしておいてくれ。
Alice stopped. As soon as he saw her stop, he hurried over to the rear courtyard, grabbed the key from where it was hanging, and used it to unlock the Aoko's bicycle. By the time Sojiro brought it back to the front of the mansion, Alice was continued toward the
アリスの
forest.
性格、なんとなくつかめてきたな。
Muttering to himself, he straddled the bike. He rested his foot on the pedal. It felt light but sturdy. Confident the bike could support his weight and Alice's, he began pedaling.
アリス
She turned in as he called out to her, before shooting him a piercing glare.
行こう。後ろの荷台に乗ってくれ。でもクッションがないから痛いと思う。辛かったら言ってくれ。止めるから。
私は大丈夫よ。しずきくんが嫌じゃなければの話だけど。
He had hit the nail on the head. Alice definitely held a grudge over the smallest things.
そういうことなら問題ないよ。アリスが後ろにいてくれるのは嬉しい。それで、行き先は間境界でいいんだな。
Unabashed and undaunted, he plowed on. His tone seemed to ease Alice's mood. She nodded calmly and took a seat on the luggage rack above the rear tire.
手を回すけど、私が触れても平気？
大丈夫だよ。体力があるのはさっき証明しただろ。
To be fair, he did carry up the entire mountain. Also, on top of that, he's kind of stupid, so... Alice suddenly wrapped her arms around Sojiro. Where she had held on tightly enough, he gripped the handlebars.
よかった。
He said quietly.
何が良かったの？
Sojiro turned to her, an ambiguous expression on his face, and they began pedaling vigorously. He let go of the brakes and the bicycle hurled down Shido Inuzuka's steep incline. Surprised by the sudden speed, Alice gasped and clutched Sojiro tighter. She almost protested, but stopped when she saw the serious expression on Sojiro's face. Instead, she decided to tighten her grip. Under the night sky, a young girl had put her faith in a young boy. Faster than a roller coaster, the bicycle hurled towards Misaki Station. Around the station, there was no sight of cars or people. While the town slipped under the snowy blanket, two people were racing like the wind. While he pedaled, the boy said,
本当によかった。二人乗りが思ったより簡単で。
"What the fuck are you doing tricks? We're trying to save Alco." He's over here hitting jet set radio poses. He was alone in his relief. It was their first bicycle ride together, and they spent it speeding down an empty highway. The boy's words were lost to the howling wind, fortunately. In spite of the late hour, there were still lights on in the church. Originally, the only light at this time of night was from the entrance to the sleepless hospital, ever vigilant and ready to receive patients. It's a bump and they do a flip. However, this was a quiet town with little nightlife. The hospital saw perhaps one emergency patient per night, however, and it was not equipped to handle tonight's sole patient. It was a little before 1 o'clock in the morning. Leaving the bicycle outside, the two headed into the church. With its snow-covered roof, the church looked like it was wearing a white hat that lit up the darkness. In the entrance stood a tall shadow.
Kuonji-san.
The man's voice was placid. Dressed in a long coat, he had been waiting for Alice.
エイリ神父、青子は
ユイカが見ています。私が駆けつけた時には手遅れでした。青崎の家に伝令を願いたいのですが。
青子はそれを望まないわ。それに、あちらも今は城に囚われているそうです。今夜の相手は、真っ先に青子の祖父の動きを封じたようですから。
Okay. The two exchanged pleasantries. Sojiro did not move from 1 foot from the stairs.
おや、そちらは。
Though the father seemed calm, his words had an edge to them. As if to protect Sojiro from his gaze, Alice stepped between them.
彼は青子の使い魔。契約はまだなされていないけれど。
使い魔ってアリス。
Sojiro was about to complain, but Alice shot him a fiery glare. That all but said, just shut up and play along.
そうですか。そのような申告はありませんでしたが、届けが遅れたのは不問としましょう。外部の魔術師と交戦中でしたからね。あなたたちはその撃退を最優先にした。
Alice nodded in thanks.
では通ります。彼の同行を許可しなさい。
ご自由に。私はこれより朝廷に向かいます。管理者が変わるのなら、両教会への資料を用意しなければいけませんので。ああ、留守中は律香に任せてありますから、必要なものがあれば彼女に。
As if passing the baton, Father Adi exited the church. Sojiro took 2 full steps back to give him a wide berth. The priest had a dignified air about him. To put it bluntly, he was strikingly beautiful. Straight nose, glistening lips, not a single imperfection on his mildly effeminate face. But that only went as far as his appearance. His manner lacked any hint of softness or grace. Just by looking at him, you could tell that he was dependable, like tempered steel, despite being somewhat unapproachable. The priest disappeared silently into the night, the darkness of his coat overpowering the moonlight. In awe, Sojiro watched him leave.
なんか 仙人みたいな人だな。
In his own way, Sojiro was expressing affection. For some reason, Father Aries' distant tone made him feel nostalgic. Alice gave Sojiro a deathly stare.
気を許さないで。彼は教会の人間よ。
Is the church fucked up here too? Church can't be good in anything.
私たちを監視する側だけど、今回は彼の手を借りるしかなかっただけ。許されるなら、真っ先に消えてほしい人間だから。
Church can't be trusted with anything. The only person in church that I trust is fucking CL. Her curse ringing in the air, Alice placed her hand on the doors to the chapel. They were twice her height and who knows how heavy. It did not look like she could open them anytime soon. Sojiro climbed the stairs 3 at a time and helped Alice push the towering doors inward. The dim light of the chapel brought with it familiar scent of burning oil. The ecclesiastical interior was breathtaking. Yes, I was taking that long time to figure out what the fuck that said. A tall ceiling with stained glass windows on every wall. It all felt intended to illustrate the presence of the Holy Spirit within the chambers. Like the foyer of the Kuwanji estate, there was not a single heater. The bitter cold made the chapel feel more severe.
あっちゃん、こっちよ。
A gentle voice echoed through the chapel, encouragers to its surroundings. It was the voice of a woman.
リツカさん、奥。
Alice made her way past the rows of pews toward the front altar. Sojiro closed the large doors and hurried after her.
早かったわね。これから迎えに行こうと思ったのに。
使える足があったから。
足って、あれ？あなた。
Sojiro showed himself, surprising the woman. They stared intently at each other, wondering what the other was doing here.
知り合い？
ああ、うん。まずいことに知り合い。宗十郎さん、引っ越したって話だけど、もしかしてあっちゃんのところに下宿してるの？
Sojiro nodded. Alice turned visibly sour at the unexpected development.
どういうこと？しずきくん、リツカさんとはどういう関係？
関係って、お魚屋さんでしょっちゅう割引してもらったり、荷物持ちを頼んでみたり、たまにお茶飲んだりする主婦の友みたいな。
意味がわかりません。リツカさん結婚していないでしょ。
Needless to say, Sojiro was also not a housewife's best friend, and all that suggested, but there were more urgent matters at hand.
うわ、そこを突っ込むのか。あっちゃん、私にだけは一切妥協がないのはどうかと思うの。
リツカさんの場合、どこまで本気かわからないから。おかしなところは全部追求しておかないといけないだけよ。
あら素敵。仲のいい姉妹みたいね、私たち。じゃあ、その信頼に応えて本当のこと言うと、彼とは町内会の顔見知りよ。スパイ行為とかそういうんじゃないし、そもそもそんな器用な人じゃないでしょ、宗十郎さんは。
本当？
Alice stared straight at Sojiro to let him know that she was mad at him for hiding this from her.
本当だ。魚屋でバイトしてる時に知り合った人だ。前に親切にしてもらったんで、お礼にイワシを1匹サービスしたら、それ以来ごひいきに。
そうそう。商店街で買い物してれば、嫌でも宗十郎さんとは顔見知りになるわ。あっちゃんも怒るぐらいなら買い物に来ればいいのに。密かな商店街のアイドルです、彼。
アイドルとは人気者という意味で、値切りやすいかもって意味じゃないような。
His apparent popularity would have been questioned another time, would have to be questioned another time. Collecting herself, Alice focused on the door in the recess of the
リ
church.
ツカさんの事情は知りませんが、彼は青子の連れです。その他に説明はいりますか？
ああ、やっぱりそういうことなのね。ま、言いたいことはいろいろあるけど、今はそれどころじゃないし。ええ、了解したわ。他ならぬあっちゃんの頼みだし、特殊な例だけど、彼はこちらで保護しましょう。
Alice nodded and began walking to the door.
アリス、
ダメよ、宗十郎さん。
As Sojiro was about to follow Alice, Ritsuka stepped in his way.
あなたは行ってはいけません。彼女たちに任せなさい。
He asserted bluntly. Meanwhile, Alice had reached the door and entered further into the chapel.
行ってはいけないって。
あなたのためよ。青子の容体は普通の人が見ていいものじゃない。気分を悪くするだけ。それとも嫌な思いをしてもいいくらい青子が心配なのかしら。
Sojiro was not able to give an immediate answer, and it finally hit him just how bad a state Aoko must be in. Based on Alice's condition when he found her, he intuited that Aoko's injuries might even be worse. He tried to imagine her expression in that state, but could not.
青崎相手に心配なんかしません。
Literally, he had never been worried about her before, not truly.
でも会いに行くのね。
はい。
He answered her reflexively. Ritsuka sighed at the boy's naivete, but nonetheless stepped aside.
どうぞ行ってらっしゃい。アリスさんが使ったドアから入って4番目の部屋よ。今一番取り込んでる頃だから、ゆいちゃんの邪魔だけはしないように。
Sojiro thanked her and went after Alice, leaving Ritsuka's Susei, the self-proclaimed everybody's friendly neighbor, alone.
さて、ゆいかあたりなら止めるんでしょうけど、ま、私は宗十郎さんの味方だし、傷つく男の子とか大好物だし、少々スパルタと自覚しておりますが、これも親切な姉心と思って、宗十郎さんには後悔していただきましょう。
She spoke with force, but her words echoed aimlessly around the chapel. With a sigh, she shrugged her shoulders and made a sign of the cross in a rather unpious manner. The sound of Sojiro's footsteps grew fainter. His lack of hesitation had left a pain in her heart. And not because he did not look back at her, but because he was choosing to ignore the primal fear inside him. My grandmother once said, an animal's death and a human's are two different things. You may think they are the same, but they are different to their core. Our heads have known the difference since the dawn of man. An animal's corpse, be it pigs or deer's, is different. If the swing of an axe or machete is violent, then so must the human corpse be. Therefore, before you see one with your own eyes, you should at least understand it with your ears. Listen closely, Sojiro. When a person dies, blood flows like a crimson river. It's too much to bear. Perhaps because he was not used to the stone path beneath his feet, Sojiro's mind wandered back to the words he'd heard as a child. The instant he opened the door, there was a palpable change in the air. The room is small, with only a simple bed and small wooden dresser. And there on the bed was lying on her side. Tending to her was the woman he'd seen in the chapel, Ritsuka. No, she only looked a lot like her. Her eyes were closed and her garments covered in blood. He had met her maybe once before. Yukiya Susei, a nun at the church. She was doing something to... Yuika held a pair of scissors and some thread. So I'm assuming by cutting out Aoko's name that she is so fucked up, she is unrecognizable. Her hands moved delicately yet quickly, and as though playing an organ. Her movements were precise, as if flawlessly reading sheet music. One by one, the supply of bandages diminished. Bandages recently applied to the wounds were quickly replaced with fresh ones. Gauze was placed everywhere to try to cope with the amount of blood. Once wet cloth was now dyed red and discarded. The dressings scattered around the floor resembled roses. In a wilted rose garden, the nun played her organ. The scene looked unlike any reality Sojiro knew. It was clear why the air had changed. There was a savage odor in the room. Even though he was experiencing it for the first time, he knew what it was. The smell burned his lungs. He could not bring himself to look at the bed. Finding his feelings, his eyes refused to move there. He noticed Alice next to the bed. Ever expressionless, she looked like a statue next to a grave, except she was trembling ever so slightly. It could have been from fear, anxiety, rage, or a combination of the three. Before her lay a life on the verge of death. He really should have stayed in the mountains, I'm saying. Well, I guess if he did, Alice would be dead. That's also true. But whose life? It was difficult to tell with only a glance. Some sort of puppet covering the bandages, perhaps. Her hair should be beautiful, but it felt flat, disheveled, despite her short braids, her chest convulsed, up and down. Facetious though the thought was, Sojiro recalled a rodeo machine on the roof of the department store. Huh. The painkillers and anesthesia could not have been working. The bandages were soaked crimson in seconds. Her fingernails bit into the sheets, her face twisted in agony. Anesthesia would not be enough, so if she was still alive, she must be conscious too. It worried him that no one seemed concerned about this. In this state, she would surely lose her mind before her life. In short, the boy never wanted to see anything like this ever again. Bedsheets should be white, not red. With every blink, the color deepened. Sojiro was finally forced to accept that the bleeding mess in the center of it was her. He felt the blood surge in his veins. The squeaking of the bed, the snip of the scissors, the gasps of agony, it all faded. All he could do was hear his own pounding heartbeat. The smell of blood she choked up sent a wave of nausea through him. His knees abandoned him. It was perfectly understandable. His brain had to shut his consciousness off to protect itself. The mind could only take so much reality. He would give anything to never see something like that again.
そうか。青子ちゃんは全部わかっているんだね。自分だけのことじゃなくて。この後に起きることも、何が残って何が残らないのかも、全部まっすぐに受け止めている。それでも自分であり続けられるということは、とても強いことなんだよ。
And on she went. I kinda liked her smile, but she just had to go on saying one thing I wish she hadn't. The last day of middle school seemed so long ago. As the ephemeral cherry blossoms petals danced around, my little dream was crushed. I never really considered myself strong, at least until I began remembering those words from that time to time.
青崎は分かってると思ってた。いや、きっと分かってるんだな。だから、そこが強いんだろうね。
And lately, an idiot who said things like that had appeared in my life. I knew I always judged people more harshly than those around me, but to have someone I'd only known for a few days point that out was like a stab in the chest. Not only that, those words sounded so similar. They made me so angry I couldn't see straight. Only him and one other person have ever said anything like that to me. Then again, I suppose my sister said it the same without actually saying it. You're different from us. But me being me, I took it as a curse rather than a compliment. My actions, my choices, my morals, all the good and bad I've done. When all's said and done, Am I really better than everyone else? Of course I am. I'll never sacrifice myself for those around me. They just had to call me strong, true to myself, in spite of how lone, stubborn, and ridiculous I know I can be. When I was younger, it only confused me. I mean, I don't know any other way. I am who I am. The frustrating fact is, I simply don't have the courage to give up. So why? Why do I get treated special for doing what comes naturally? The sunlight stirred her. Maybe it was the pain from having her whole body be held together by arcane threads, but Oko felt like she'd had a silly dream. She gulped air through her painful parched throat. Gray rays of light shone through a small window, bringing her back to reality. Unable to bear it, Oko attempted to roll over. Except she could only move her right arm. She tried lifting her arm, but couldn't feel anything past her elbow. When she stopped concentrating on her bandaged arm, it fell to the bed like a stone. Oko took in her surroundings, moving only her eyes. Evidently, she had been asleep in this bed. Unable to feel certain parts of her body, she felt like a robot. The room was tiny and undecorated. It was like an apartment without a tenant. Judging by the good repair, she guessed that she was an Ida church. Outside, it seemed closer to noon than morning. Clouds filled the sky as usual, dulling the sun's rays. Idly, she thought it could only be enough to melt the snow outside. And then finally, she noticed the figure of a girl. Next to her bed, Alice Koanji was sitting in a chair, unmoving. She called out to her, all too casually. It was more difficult to talk than she thought. Alice was her typical stoic self, although Oko did notice a glimpse of concern in her eyes.
寝てないんでしょ。肌が荒れてる。
努力はしたわ。けど、瞳子さんに飲まされたものが解毒されるまで眠れそうにないの。半端な痛みは、こういう時に生ぬるいわね。
Alice's uncharacteristically vulgar comment helped Oko feel a little bit more like her usual self. She felt reassured having a comrade in arms by her side instead of a concerned neighbor.
そう、アリスもやられたの。状況は大体予想してるけど、一応細部を聞かせてくれない？
Oko remained horizontal as she spoke with a cool tune. Despite Oko's condition, Alice granted her request. After all, they had known each other for 2 years. Alice knew exactly what kind of anesthesia Oko Azaki needed right now. Alice Koanji's battle with Toko Ozaki ended in the former's victory. The Thames Troll was a special familiar even among fairy tale monsters. While lacking the incredible reality warping abilities of Flat Snark, its sheer mass, durability, and strength were second to none. Toko's rune magecraft was rendered completely ineffective by its stone armor. In all fairness to Toko, most mages would not stand a chance against the bridge giant. The reason lay in the mystic's body. As a general law of magecraft, a mystic will lose to a stronger, older mystic. The history of the bridge giant dated back well over 1,000 years. Its origins could be traced to the 1st century when Britannia was conquered by the Romans. Conversely, despite having roots dating back to the Age of Gods, runes had unfortunately been lost to time. Rune magecraft was little more than an attempt to revive and use a dead art. However, monsters from fairy tales, like the troll, were different. They lived on in the hands of Alice Koanji. The magical world was vast, but one could probably count on one hand the number of magecraft that still functioned after being chanted into existence a millennia ago, as Alice's ploys did. In contrast, Toko, the rune user, was only about 2 decades old. Carving a rune took only a moment. There was no way a quick spell could defeat a personification of London Bridge in Alice's homeland. That being said, A beast had appeared that surpassed even those from fairy tales. Beowulf the Golden Beast. It seemed absurd to compare a small and relatively powerless wolf to a towering stone giant. The Thames Troll's attacks were earthquaking. A direct hit from its 50-ton strikes would smash anything to paste, while a glancing blow would still create mincemeat. And yet the beast had attacked head-on and torn right through it. The wolf's fur bristled. The creature metamorphosed like liquid. It was a breathtaking display. The wolf howled at the moon as if in joy and streaked forth like a bolt of golden light. In an instant, the duel was decided. The radiant spear of a wolf flew straight through the giant's chest and sank its teeth into its heart. The troll exploded. Chunks of stony muscle rained down. Luminous fur scattered in the wind. Two mystics dispersed without a trace and returned from whence they came. The curtain fell on a battle straight out of mythology. There among the rubble of the fairy tale monster was the golden wolf standing like a flame. What came after could barely be considered a battle. It was more like a slaughter of defeated pawns. The wolf leapt on Alice, disemboweling her with ease. Its claws cut through the protective wards on Alice's coat like a hot knife through butter. The golden wolf. This wolf, which understood human speech, could only be the magical creature known as the werewolf. Werewolves were the forest people of Western Europe, with origins far more ancient than the fabricated vampire legends of the continent. Really? However, none were known to have golden coats. I feel like that's not true. I feel like vampires are much older than werewolves. Anyway, vampires come from the revenant branch of like folklore, which definitely goes back to Africa. But you know, whatever. It was said that the most elite werewolf bloodlines boasted silver fur. Silver werewolves were pack leaders, and werewolves of the caliber were considered phantasmal rather than merely magical creatures. But a golden werewolf was superior even to that, and so transcended human knowledge. Alasquanji's ploys were among the ultimate mystics to have been created by humankind. Therefore, the golden wolf could only have been a mystic born of the planet. When a celestial body has been active for millions, even billions of years, occasionally a miraculous droplet of creation spills over into our current world. This mystic had to be over 3,000 years old. A human mage. No, any mage living in the current magical paradigm would be helpless against the golden wolf. Not even in theory would they stand a chance of defeating it. Which meant that this werewolf was Oko and Alice's worst nightmare.
そう。アリスがお手上げの相手だものね。私がどうにかできるはずもなかったわけだ。でも、要は魔術でなければいいのよね。テムズの動力は魔力だけど、テムズのパンチは純粋な衝撃でしょ。当たりさえすればぺしゃんこじゃないの。
残念だけど、あれ基本は狼の姿なだけで状況によって形を変えるわ。テムズの腕を受け止めた時は大猿みたいになっていたし。
What the fuck?
機関銃やロケットで狙ってもかわされるか体の硬い生き物に変化して防ぐんじゃないかしら。
地球上の生き物なら何にでも変われるってことか。でもまあ質量までは無理かな。基本は2メートル台の生物のいいとこ取りってあたりで勘弁してほしいわね。ねえ、すごく関係ないけど深海の生き物に変わられたらちょっと怖いと思わない？
Oko narrowed her eyes as she bemoaned this creature's existence. The conversation appeared to have revived her fighting spirit. Once again, her eyes were focused and her thoughts clear. Oko was back to her usual self.
で、 その後はアリスうまく逃げられたの？
いいえ、私もあの狼にやられたわ。
Alice explained how the wolf had pinned her to the ground. Incidentally, she kept the part about Sojiro rather short. Alice herself was not entirely sure why she felt it necessary to leave most of that information out.
アリスが相手をした後、休む間もなく私のところに来たわけか。
So yeah, I thought she was gonna do that, but I figured, oh, maybe because I used all of my magic power, or maybe I used a lot of magic power, I'll just retreat for the day. But no, she went straight to Aoko.
初めから昨日で決着をつけるつもりだったんだ、兄貴。姉妹かな。ここぞって時のタイミングは一緒だったの忘れてた。切り札は見せたからには敵を殲滅しなくちゃいけない。姉貴は視点を残り2つにしておいて、自分の正体を告げてこっちの戦力を分けさせた。その時点で奥の手を投入してくることは覚悟してたけど、まさか人狼なんて極物とはね。
Aoko let out a heavy sigh. Alice nodded slightly in agreement.
それはそれとして、宗十郎がアリスを助けに行くなんてね。感謝しなくちゃいけないんだろうけど、バカな真似してくれたわ。私が瞳子の立場なら、報復の可能性は一つ残らず排除する。私たちがどうにかなった後、猫の手首ひねるみたいに片付けられるわよ、あいつ。
しずきくんならこちらで保護してもらってるけど。
Aoko's eyes widened.
うわ、どういう風の吹き回し？アリスがあいつの世話を焼くなんて。
だって放っておいたら青子が怒ると思って。
Alice responded with her eyes closed. Aoko frowned in silent indignation. Aoko frowned in silent indignation, as if she wanted to protest where Alice got that idea from.
まあいいけど、それじゃあ今ここにいるんだ、宗十郎。姿が見えないけどどうしたの？
Only able to move her neck, she looked around as best she could.
彼なら気分を悪くして倒れたわ。今はエイリ神父の寝室を借りているけど。
Aoko furrowed her brow and had collapsed. Sure, he was under the church's protection, but had Toko set the wheels in motion for his death?
何があったの？一体。
Alice paused for a moment before carefully answering the question.
それが彼、あなたを見て嘔吐したの。
She had decided to be blunt. Aoko was taken aback. For several seconds, dim sunlight leaked through the window. When she found her voice again, she muttered,
いいけど、ひどい侮辱よね、それって。
perhaps amused or perhaps exhausted from staying up all night, Alice cracked a tiny giggle.
何よ、そんなにおかしい、アリス。
さあ、どうかしらね。けど、しずきくんにも言い分はあるでしょう。
Aoko praised her physical state. She was dressed in a hospital gown. Bandages covered the majority of her body. Her right leg was in a plaster cast. Since she could move her right arm, she brought her bandaged fingers up to her
そっ
throat.
か、思い出した。あのガキ、まず私の首元に噛みついたんだっけ。すごかったわよ、首が噛み砕かれるのって。ゴキーンって音が頭の中に響いて、気持ち悪いったらなかったわ。ち、あそこから好き勝手やられたもんだから、つい忘れてた。
So she got mauled. Uncle sounded upbeat, but the look in her eyes was anything but. She had been torn to pieces, but her life had been mercifully spared. Mercilessly probably works too. And at least she hadn't been dismembered. She had been bitten, beaten, and her bones broken. Magic crests containing an Aozaki's secret arts decorated her body. Even if her spine was broken, as long as her body was alive, the crest would piece it back together. Despite the crest easing the pain a little, she still hurt enough to want to kill the wolf 100 times over.
視点は全部壊された。これで三崎市の霊脈はフリーってわけね。全容を把握してるのはうちらだけの特権だったけど、東子は昔から知ってる以上、解析の手間もいらないと。真剣な話、所有権の書き換えまで何時間かかると思う？
東子さんなら2日かからないでしょうね。支店の修復は土地そのものに任せるしかない。支店のプロテクトが治る頃にはこの町はもう彼女のものよ。
明日の夜明けとともに破産する我が身とはね。それでアリスの方はどうなの？まだいける？
思考魔術だけなら少しは。あとは小道具に頼ることになるでしょうね。
ああ、お話にならないか。
Elko went silent again, staring straight at the ceiling. Alice knew all too well what that look meant.
それでもやるんでしょ、青子は。
まあね、私諦めるのってできないから。で、そういうアリスはどうなのよ？
私は一度自分のものになったものは。
Elko muttered in agreement to Alice's terse response. Alice's intense attachment to her possessions was enough to make even Elko shiver. Once something is mine, it stays mine. To take it a step further, betrayal was an unforgivable sin. This personal mono was further proof of her uncompromising nature.
オッケー、決まりね。じゃあ、悪いけどもう少し休ませて。今晩までには何とか動けるようにするから。
If the nun who stitched her back together had heard that, she would have fainted. Elko could barely even eat in her current condition. Even so, Alice nodded and stood up. As Elko's partner, she knew that once her mind was made up, she had to trust her. Suddenly, the girl in black began to take her leave. She stopped in front of the door, her hand to her mouth.
アリス？
I was curious, suspecting that Alice had something silly to say again. Quite the contrary. Instead of blushing, Alice furrowed her brow, like she was thinking over a difficult riddle.
アリスー？
Uncle called out, but Alice remained with her back to her roommate.
なんで間に合ったのかしら。
She spoke as if the words had accidentally burst from her thoughts. Alice's question was, okay, so I was under the assumption that like what his explanation was correct, but yeah, he did not have enough time to make it to her. So I'm assuming whatever he's bandaged with is magical or whatever. Or anti-magical, maybe. Alice's question was about something Uncle could not possibly have guessed.
あの時もそう。私たち始発で帰ってきたのに。
He carried on mumbling at the door. Unable to find an answer, Alice gloomily put her hand on the doorknob.
言いたくないなら別にいいけど。何がどうしたって言うのよ、アリス。
Alice did not respond. She opened the door to leave the room and then left a few words hanging in the air.
どうでもいいことだけど、ゆいかさんにはしずきくんは見えなかったそうよ、青子。
What? The door closed with a thud.
そりゃまた珍しい。
Aoko mumbled to herself from the bed, seeming slightly happier. So either she means that literally, or she was pretending not to see him. Blind since birth. Okay, there we go. Blind since birth, Yuika Susei saw the world through her other senses. She was especially sensitive to enemies or those who bore ill will, and typically viewed almost everyone as a threat, presumably because that was the easiest thing to pick up on. So when she says she couldn't see Sojiro, that means he was completely harmless. And then, that harmless individual decided to pay the small sick room a visit. Sojiro looked like a stiff breeze could knock him over. It made Oko wonder who the real patient was.
何しに来たの、あんた。
Though Uncle could barely move, she was still able to give him a cold shoulder. His expression gaunt, His expression gaunt, Sojiro grunted something or other before beginning to speak more coherently.
アリスが客間で眠ったから礼拝堂にいたんだけど、人が集まりだしたんで、こっちに逃げてきた。
あ、礼拝の時間か。クリスマスだってのによくやるわ。
My church was never open on Christmas. Thank God for that. It was indeed Christmas, but regular Mass was on Christmas Eve. The ones gathering in the chapel must have been truly devout followers. Tourists were rare in Misaki after all. So much so that almost no one visited the area this time of year. The worshippers must have been locals.
それで別にどうってことないでしょ。
Oko was as distant as ever. She clearly had not forgotten the fact that he vomited when he saw her and had a hint of spite leaked into her voice. Then again,
いや、ちょうどいい機会だから、いろいろと聞きたくなって。
hey, Merry Christmas, your friend almost fucking died.
少し話をしていいかな。
Since Oko was always in a bad mood, Sojiro did not pick up on anything out of the ordinary. He wanted to tell him to go drink some water because he looked ready to collapse, but he didn't seem aware of his own condition. And to be fair to him, Alice did say Oko was in bad shape given how unaccustomed to blood Sojiro was. It was no wonder he had fainted.
ああ、そうか。話なんてまだ無理だな。すまない。出直してくる。
Sojiro seemed to have misunderstood Oko being in deep thought as not having enough stamina to speak. Naturally, this did not sit well with Oko.
待ちなさいよ。話だけなら別に構わないわ。やる気持て余してるし、暇つぶしがてらに相手してあげるわよ。ま、退屈しのぎにしてはちょっとグレード下がるけど、この際贅沢言ってられないし。
Yeah, this is what's known as a tsundere. Sojiro sensed that this is going to be rough, but took a seat on the chair next to the bed.
で、何が聞きたいの？
Oko spoke energetically in an attempt to distract her from her weakened appearance. Naturally, she knew she was fooling no one.
やっぱり青崎は強いな。安心した。
Sojiro said, nodding in admiration. Oko shot him an unimpressed look in response to the unwanted praise.
あんたってほんと間が悪いわ。いいわよ、別に。私の夢の話だから、そっちが気に病むことは。
She glowered, remembering. Come to think of it, almost everyone in her dream was here in the church, turning her dour expression into an irritated one.
やめやめ、こんなつまんない話。聞きたいことがあるなら手っ取り早く済ませちゃってよ、宗十郎。
よかった。じゃあ、まず今の状況を聞かせてくれないか。瞳子さんの話じゃ、俺も無関係じゃないそうだし。
Sojiro spoke calmly, making Aoko wonder if he really understood the gravity of his situation. He was Toko's enemy now. He was defenseless and needed protection. Neither Oko nor Alice could help him, and the church could withdraw their sanctuary at any moment. He had picked a side, and that had turned him from innocent bystander into a target. The answer he sought was as simple as that. He knew the facts. He was not a mage and therefore powerless.
まあ、それでもアリスは助けられたわけだし。
Oko did owe him for that. To say thanks, she decided to at least give him the whole story up until now.
よし、今までの経緯も含めて軽く説明してみましょうか。
Give him a fucking gun is better than nothing. You do realize they don't have guns, right? Like, that's just not something you can just get. America is the outlier.
私も何か得るものがあるかもしれないし。
Oko composed herself before beginning her explanation. The battle began at the end of November. A lot happened since then, including meeting Sojiro.
事の起
Magic
こり
up
は
a
1ヶ
fucking
月
gun? I
前
don't know. I don't think it works that way.
三崎市に貼られた結界の端っこが何者かに消されたのが私が跡継ぎになってから5度目の三崎市を狙う敵の登場ってわけ。今回の敵は私たちとは直接戦わず、まず土地を奪うところから始めたわ。今までのやつは私たちを半人前と舐めていたから、大抵は真正面から仕掛けてきて、勝手にアリスの猟犬の餌食になったんだけど、まあそれはどうでもいいとして。
Let's go visit Hawaii. That's even model guns, bro. There's like
町
none
の
of them
結
are
界には
real.
2種類あって、侵入者を見つけるものと土地の力を有効利用するものがあるの。 敵が壊したのは土地の結界の方で、これが全部壊されると、私やアリスは土地の所有権を失ってしまう。土地のないはぐれ魔術師と同じになっちゃうのよ。もちろんそうならないように侵入者をあぶり出すための結界があるんだけど、こっちには何の反応もなかった。ま、当然よね。今回の敵は私の姉貴青崎東子その人だったんだから、青崎の結界は同族である姉貴を敵とみなさなかった。あるいは姉貴は結界の抜け道、構造の資格をついたのかもしれない。もともとうちの後継者はあの人だし、それぐらいの知識はあったでしょう。そうして姉貴は私たちに見つかることなく好き勝手に結界の支点を壊し始めた。時間をかけてゆっくり壊していったのは、外からやってきた部外者を演じていたからでしょうね。さすがに連続して壊されればこっちも身内の犯行だと疑うし、うち親戚である浅木家とは仲悪いままだしさ。姉貴の芝居に騙された私たちが間抜けなんだけど、セオリーとして結界崩しは長丁場になるものなの。管理地の結界は強固に作られているからね。普通は半年単位での攻防になる。攻める側はまず結界を形取る視点が何個あるか、それがどの5大要素でくくられているか、退去の正しい順序はどれか、それらを地道に解き明かしていく。もちろん管理地の魔術師たちの目を盗みながら。対して守る側は侵入者がいることに気づくから、悪さをされる前に敵の拠点を見つけ出して外敵を排除する。こんな感じで結界崩しは長期戦、あるいは前哨戦になるものなの。大抵は攻める側が視点を壊すぞとアピールして土地の持ち主を翻弄疲弊させてから、魔術師同士の直接対決で決着がつくわ。なんで結界を全部壊す必要はないのよ。管理地の持ち主を始末した方が早いし、その後は術式さえ解読しちゃえば土地を結界ごと横取りできる。わざわざ壊して作り直すより、昔からある結界の方が土地に馴染んでいて強力だしで一石二鳥でしょ。
That was how Oko and Alice were duped. They never thought the enemy would waste time and effort needed to break all sigils.
だから私とアリスはとりあえず受けに回った。視点を探すために町を調査している敵を待ち伏せて、これを片っ端から倒そうって。でもそのうちの一つがケチのつき始めだった。三崎町の公園で山張って待ち受けていた時、どうでもいい第三者が覗き見してやがったのよ。
Indeed. It was the ultimate taboo in the world of magecraft. The existence of mages must never be revealed to outsiders.
その後のことはわかるでしょ。私は敵との小競り合いをアリスに任せて、それより重要な目撃者狩りに専念せざるを得なくなった。言っとくけど、これはあんたのことだからね。そこで我関せずみたいな顔しないこと。
No sooner had Aoko said that, Sojiro gave her that exact look. Clearly, he had been listening, but not necessarily understanding.
いいけどね。宗十郎がそんなだから秘密は漏れなかったんだし。で、あんたっていう目撃者を消そうとした私の単独行動は敵にしても都合のいいものだった。強敵であるアリスがいないんだから、敵はこれを機会に私を始末しようと特注品の人形を差し向けたと思っていたけど、あれはただの嫌がらせね、間違いなく。そうでなきゃ私そっくりの人形なんて派遣するかっての。
Sojiro nodded, thinking back to the Aoka replica.
あれのことは忘れてちょうだい。まあそこから先はあんたもうすうす知ってるでしょ。私とアリスは敵との戦いに専念することになって、毎日のように捜査の手を空振って決戦の夜を迎えて、今はこうしてる。大体の経緯はこんなところよ。
She stared down at her body as if recalling what happened would help her accept her current state. Under the sheet,
青崎、これまでの君たちの話は分かった。けど、肝心の今の状況はどうなっているんだ？
okay. I realized I was not on the right thing. It's amazing how clueless he looks at all times. Yeah, no, they did a good job with his character art. Sojiro's specific concern was the reason why Aoko lying there. More than anything, he wanted to know what had happened to her the night before.
バカね。状況も何も完全に私たちの負けじゃない。
Judging by her tone, she would have raised both hands sarcastically in celebration if she could.
負けた？
事実は正しく受け止めなくっちゃね。5つの視点が全部壊された時点で勝負はついたの。管理地の所有権は宙ぶらりで、明日には東子の手に渡るでしょう。で、それを阻止したいこっちは、私もアリスもこのありさま。もう立場は逆転したから、これから私たちは挑戦者。つまり、はぐれ魔術師ってことよ。
Which meant that Aoko, Alice, and Sojiro had only a few more days with which to utilize the church's services. Ida Church was not only an arm of the Mages Association, but also a branch of the Holy Church that monitored heresy. Aoko and Alice were owners of Misaki City's spiritual lands, but they belonged to neither of these organizations. The only reason the church helped them at all was because they were the land's administrators. Once those rights were lost, the church would have no reason to provide any further aid.
エイリ神父はコウモリだから私を助けてくれたけど、ユイカさんは教会の代行者だから、傷が塞がったなら明日にでも出て行けって言ってくる。教会にとっちゃ魔術師なんてもともと排除すべき商売敵だからね。バカリツカはま、泣きつけば力にはなってくれるでしょうけど。
Sojiro understood a little what Aoko was talking about.
そうじゃなくて、青崎、昨日の夜、何があったんだ？
Sojiro pressed her, and Aoko really wished he had not.
見てわからない。惨敗なんてものじゃないわ。喉に食いつかれる。体中好き放題噛まれまくる。挙句に右のマモなんてなくなってたそうよ。ま、アリスのチョコレートのおかげで出血死は免れたけど。
She knocked on the cast around her leg. Aoko spoke casually, but was trying to hide how much she wanted revenge for being humiliated. In contrast, Sojiro felt empty. The little color he had in his face began to fade. Was he repulsed by the terrible situation, or were his instincts telling him to flee? Regardless, he appeared very human.
なんでそこで固まる？あ、そっか。私を見て吐き出しちゃうぐらいナイーブなんだっけ、宗十郎ってば。大丈夫よ、今はくっついてるから。ゆいかさんは治療専門だし、私だってただやられてたわけじゃないし。復元は青崎の得意分野だから、あれくらい問題ないわ。
She gave him a reassuring look, but his expression was unchanged. Well, I expected him to worry, but this level of concern made it hard for even her to berate him. Feeling embarrassed, she started talking again.
けど姉切ったら、どうやってあんなのを手なずけたんだろう。金の狼なんて伝説の中にしかいないと思ってた。神代の神秘であるあいつには千年クラスの魔術じゃないと太刀打ちできない。かといって殴り合いでどうにかできる相手じゃないし。
As images of the night before entered Aoko's mind, she bit her lip in anguish.
金の狼
Conversely, the bizarre phrase snapped Sojiro out of a state of shock.
そう、黄金の人狼。金狼って言った方がいいのかな。狼男って言ってもわからないわよね。人間と狼のいいとこ取りみたいなやつと思えばいいわ。
I looked up if the color of people's faces actually fades if you're sad, and one of the first images that popped up was a man grinning ear to ear. That's funny. However, yes, that is real, because the first thing your body does in response to shock is pull all of the blood into the important organs. So it literally drains from your face.
野獣というより魔獣の類よ。普通の人狼なら対抗手段はあるんだけど、トウコが連れてるのは黄金の毛並みをした怪物でさ。あれは原初の人狼の血統で、魔獣を通り越して幻獣の域に達している。
I just saw this game pop up on eShop for like $1. How is it? It depends. Did you like the anime Fate Stay Night or in anything written by that author? Because if you do, then yeah, it's really good. I mean, it is still a visual novel, so you will be reading for 90% of it. And by 90% of it, I mean actually 100% of it. It's a book. You're reading a book. I did watch the show and it was wild. I liked it a lot. I had no clue it was the same creators. Yeah, it's the same creator. So if you like that, you'll like this. There's a lot of carryover between the two things. For example, the magic system and how magic works in Fate is the same way it works here. No problem. If you don't want spoilers, now would be the time to dip out. Why would I read any form of my own opinion on something that I could just watch the YouTuber bitch about it for 5 hours and just steal their opinion instead? Exactly. And now people are going to be outsourcing their opinions to AI.
聖域の相手には、そいつらを上回る神秘、積み重ねた時間とか魔術の奥義じゃないと無効化されるのよ。
Thanks for the look, 3am.
魔術は万能だけど、この年月の差だけは覆せない。人間の魔術師にとっては天敵みたいな自然災害ね。
Her words indicated more admiration than hatred. The way she'd whispered about the wolf. Strangely made sense to Sojiro.
何？
いや、要するに青崎たちじゃかなわない相手なんだな。なんてひどいやつだ。アリスはお腹が裂かれてた。青崎は傷ついてないところはないぐらいだ。子供なのに。いや、子供だから加減がないのか。
What? Wait, bro knows exactly what's going on. Why can't paying rent ever be simple? It's simple for us. What's going on? Sojiro's face was ghostly pale as he muttered nervously. Uncle merely nodded in agreement. No, really, Aoko, that should be a red flag. Why does he understand that?
人の体を何だと思っているのかしらね。あのお子さん。なぬ？
Aoko raised her head. She looked as if she had seen a ghost.
子供って言った？あんた、なんでそんなことまで知ってるの？
やっぱりそうなのか。金色の髪なんて2人もいないと思ったんだ。そいつなら一度見かけたことがある。
Oh, the kid from when they were looking at the thing.
青崎が口にしたような怪物じゃなかったけど、森の奥で。
The kid. Okay.
木の実が二人がかりでとっちめようなんて怖いこと言い出してさ。金一個ないから止めたんだよ。
His tone was curious as the things he was trying to articulate. Oko, however, had more pressing matters. Much more pressing.
見たってどこで？
学校の旧校舎。あ、そういえば挨拶程度なら話もしたっけ。一度だけアルバイトの時に牛肉50キロを生で届けたことがあって。
この大バカ者
A strangely satisfying slapping sound rang out. Ignoring her wounds completely, Oko had grabbed a slipper and thrown it at Sujiro's unassuming face as hard as she could. Damn. It threw a whole chunk at him. She panted as Sojiro was knocked completely out of his chair. For a while, neither moved.
なんで怒るんだ、青崎。
The boy asked, unfazed as he slowly picked himself up. He sat cross-legged as Aoko scolded him like an enemy.
当たり前じゃない。なんでそんな怪しいこと黙ってんのよ、あんたは。
I mean, what the fuck? What were we supposed to say about that, man? It's a child.
言うほどのことでもない。第一、君たちにこんな話をしても怒られるだけじゃないか。
This is true. Aoko knew he was right, and so she swallowed her words. She imagined themselves at dinner.
ところで今日、牛肉の山を担いで届けたんだ。一匹丸ごと。いや、あるところにはあるものだね。
If he had actually said it, Aoko and Alice's response would have been less than cordial.
それはそうだけど、本当に金髪の子供が旧校舎にいたの？
それが青崎の言う人狼かどうか自信はないけど、少なくとも町中の料理店が入れ替わりでおかしな注文を届けてるのは事実だ。駅前の大デートなんてお得意様だって。
確かに食事のたびにあいつを外に出してちゃ目立つだろうけど。
He did not want to believe it, but the child had to be a werewolf. Could Toko really have been so careless as to hide him in plain sight? It did not matter at this point. With the werewolf's habitat revealed, Toko's base had been revealed too. To take over the bounded field, she needed an inconspicuous place to store materials. Misaki High School's old school building was the perfect place.
つまり、すべての鍵はあんたが隠し持ってたってわけね。
隠していたんじゃない。だいたい青崎が裏山の掃除に参加していたら、その時に分かったんじゃないか。飛び丸一人に任せず、青崎も掃除に出ればよかったんだ。
In response to Sojiro's infallible logic, Aoko snapped her fingers. Instead of another slipper missile, she let the faithful white color express how she felt. And with the tightening of the collar, Sojiro realized something. Aoko had changed. From the bed, she looked down on him with a commanding glare. Though weak from her injuries, she was sharp as ever. He would be forgiven for forgetting she was ever a patient. She was raring to fight. It went without saying who her rage was directed at.
青崎?
Aoko responded in a vulnerable tone. Perhaps she had been taken by surprise. Now that she had an objective, she had been lost in her own little world.
ありがとう、宗十郎。
He expected her to be sarcastic, but this was different. She was genuinely thanking him. He had never known her to be like this and was taken aback.
あのね、とにかくトウコの居場所が分かったのはあんたのおかげだから、礼ぐらい言っておこうと思ったの。それがお気に召さなかった？
いや、お礼を言ってもらえるのはいいことだけど、まさかその体でトウコさんのところに行くつもりか。
His tone was closer to scolding than sympathetic. Aoko simply nodded resolutely.
取られたものは取り返すものよ、宗十郎。それもすぐに相手のものになってしまう前にね。ぐずぐずしている暇はないわ。
He sounded unshakable. Even so, Sojiro would not back down.
勝ち目がなくてもか。 暇はないと言うけど、今はそれ以上に休息が必要だろう。その傷だって今は見れるけど、昨日はひどかったじゃないか。生きて。
違うわ。あれは幸運なんかじゃない。
幸運じゃない？
そう。トウコはね、私が生き残れる程度の傷にとどめたのよ。今回は見逃してやるから、もう一度やってこいって意味でね。だから私は生きてるんだし、トウコは私が行くのを待ってる。お互いがお互いの舞台の幕を下ろすために。嫌だけど、あんたの言葉を借りるならね。
Irritation tainted Aoko's words. From the side, she looked terrifyingly serious. She was ready to fight to the death. Togo had given her little choice. Sojiro could understand neither sister.
殺すために生かしたっていうのか、トウコさんは。青崎はそれが分かっているのに行こうとしている。
そうよ。勝負はついたけど、まだ私たちの話は終わっていないもの。確かに全開してから行った方がいいに決まってる。けど、そうしている間にトウコは岬の深部にたどり着く。そうなったら、私の最後の切り札さえ使えなくなる。自分にできることを自分からなくしてしまうのは。
Though the pain in her azure eyes was not as deep as the pain of death, it spoke of regret she would feel as it she spoke of the regret she would feel if she did not do everything possible while blood still flowed through her veins.
納得いったのなら黙ってていい。これは私の戦い。あんたには何の責任も関わりもない私の人生なの。座して死を待つなんてまっぴらごめんよ。勝つ気があるならいつまでもベッドで寝てるわけにはいかないでしょ。
Sojiro was dumbstruck. Aoko could never let anyone else get involved. Whether that was because she cared or cared less, he could not tell. What he did understand, though, was if he wanted to stop her, he would have to do so with his bare hands. And he knew better than to try that. Even so, he had to ask one last question. If he did not, he would not be able to live with himself after leaving his room.
わからないな。青崎はなんでそこまでするのか。君を縛っているのは義務と強制。どっちなんだろうね。
There was a sadness in his eyes. However, Aoko was unmoved by them.
らしくなく難しいこと聞いてくるのね。いいわ。口にしても仕方のないことだけど答えてあげる。その2つはね、常に私を圧迫してるものだと思う。けど勘違いはしないで。義務も強制も誇りも恐れも周りから与えられたものじゃない。トウコと戦うのをやめたところで祖父は私を叱らないだろうし、アリスも文句は言わないでしょう。ここで逃げてもそれはそれで誰にとってもどうでもいい話になって終わるだけ。だから他人は関係ない。本当に意味なんてないのよ、何にだって。でも私はトウコから逃げたりしない。これはただのここにいるっていう存在証明なの。私は単に意味がないからこそできることは全部やるって決めただけなんだから。
With fiery passion, Naoko Ozaki had said her piece. Sojiro was left with a pang in his chest. He did not know why, but her words angered him. Then again, at the same time, her self-confidence had him in wonder. Even though she had said that her life had no meaning, her stubbornness gave meaning to everything.
それがたとえ。
Without thinking, he started to ask another question. Maybe he wanted to change her mind. Maybe he just wanted to hear her answer.
たとえ他の誰も見ていなかったとしても。
It came out as a murmur. Indeed, if no one was watching, no one could know that she had fled. This was the situation Aoko was in. Even so, she shot him down instantly.
あら、見てるわよ。少なくとも私自身がね。
Her expression brightened, possibly because she had been surprised at having to state the obvious. Sojiro was wide-eyed in shock, but Aoko remained nonchalant.
知らないの、宗十郎。 生きてく上で一番の観客っていうのはね、他ならぬ自分自身なのよ。
Pedro did not respond to her somewhat exasperated tone, but simply rose to his feet. He looked defeated, which was not like him at all.
宗次郎、
すまない。君が素晴らしいことを言っているのはわかるんだ。けど、俺にはわからない。
He meekly walked toward the door. As he placed his hand on the doorknob, he paused. For a few seconds, he fought with himself, desperately trying to think of something to say. No words came forth, and so he opened the door, which swung with a strange creak, and he left the room. After watching him go, Oko turned her gaze toward the window. It was nearly evening. A thin veil of darkness was threatening to descend on the town outside. And that's it until tomorrow. We'll get to the actual fight and stuff then. I'm not gonna read out to anybody because I don't want to. So I will see everybody tomorrow. Yeah, same bat time, same bat channel. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And I will see you later. Bye.